value paradox. Have you ever wondered why something can be both priceless and worthless at the same time? At first, this might sound like a contradiction. How can something be of immense value and at the same time hold no value at all? This is the essence of the value paradox, a concept that challenges our understanding of what constitutes true value. It asks us to reconsider how we assign worth to things, people, and experiences, and to question whether value is always intrinsic or if it can be entirely subjective. The value paradox is deeply rooted in how we perceive and assign meaning to the things around us. Let's start with something simple, a diamond. Diamonds are often seen as one of the most valuable things on earth. They are rare, beautiful, and have become a symbol of wealth and status. But if you take a diamond and simply throw it into a river, it loses its value in that specific context. The diamond's value is now dependent on how people perceive it and what they're willing to exchange for it. On the other hand, consider something that is often seen as worthless, like a rock. To most people, a rock holds little intrinsic value. It might be found on the side of the road or in a field, and it's often overlooked and discarded. But imagine if you were an archaeologist or if that rock happened to be a rare, ancient fossil. Suddenly, its value could skyrocket. What was once considered worthless is now priceless. This highlights the first aspect of the value paradox, the idea that something's value can fluctuate depending on context, perspective, and perception. This paradox is particularly evident in the world of art. For instance, consider a painting by a well-known artist. An abstract piece that might look like a splash of paint on a canvas can sell for millions of dollars, while a painting with incredible technical skill might be valued far less. The intrinsic value of the materials and the labor involved in creating both paintings might be almost identical, but the perceived value is vastly different. It's not about the paint or the canvas, but about how we perceive the artist's name, their reputation, and the narrative behind the work. This is a clear example of how value can be subjective. But what happens when we take this concept even further? What if the value we place on something is not based on any inherent quality but rather on our belief in its value? This is where the paradox gets even more complex. The value paradox forces us to consider whether value is an illusion, something that exists only because we believe it does. After all, if a diamond or a painting is valuable only because we agree that it is, does that mean it's truly valuable, or is it only valuable because we collectively say it is? This idea also leads us to consider how society's values influence individual perceptions. For example, money is one of the most commonly discussed forms of value in the world today. At its core, money is simply paper or metal, things that, by themselves, don't have inherent value. What gives money its value is the belief that it can be exchanged for goods and services, and that others will accept it as a form of payment. But imagine a world where everyone suddenly decided that money was worthless, where no one believed it had any purchasing power. In that case, the value of money would evaporate and it would simply be paper again. The value paradox can also be seen in our daily lives when it comes to human relationships. For instance, consider the value we place on friendships. We often say that true friendship is priceless, that the bond between close friends cannot be measured in terms of material wealth. And yet, in practice, many of us engage in a kind of transactional approach to relationships. We value friends who offer something to us, whether that's companionship, emotional support, or shared experiences. If a friendship no longer meets our needs or expectations, we may reassess its value and sometimes we even let it go. The paradox here is that while we claim friendship is priceless, we often measure its value based on the things we gain from it. The same concept applies to love. People often speak of love as something pure, a force that transcends material wealth. But love can also be influenced by external factors, such as the stability a person provides, their status, or even their physical appearance. So, while love may be seen as invaluable in the abstract, it can be tied to factors that are far more tangible and measurable in the real world. Now, think about something else that might seem to hold no inherent value, like a person's time. Time, in itself, is not something we can touch or hold. It's an abstract concept that we all experience, yet we assign great value to it. Time is often said to be the most valuable thing we have, and yet we regularly waste it on things that don't seem important in the long run. This is another aspect of the value paradox. Something that is not tangible or material can still be considered highly valuable, even though its value is intangible and cannot be easily measured. In fact, much of the value paradox comes from our tendency to value things that are fleeting or intangible more than we value things that are enduring or substantial. The desire for instant gratification, the rush to get what we want now, often leads us to overlook things that would offer us lasting value. This plays into the paradox of how we define and pursue value in our lives. We may sacrifice long-term fulfillment for short-term pleasure, even though we know that long-term happiness is more enduring and meaningful. This paradox also extends to the way we value success. In many cultures, success is equated with material wealth, social status, and personal achievement. But for some, true success might be measured in terms of happiness, inner peace, or personal growth, things that can't be quantified in the same way. Here we face a conflict between two different types of value: external value, which is based on outward success and recognition, and internal value, which comes from personal satisfaction and growth. The value paradox highlights the tension between these different types of value: external and internal, tangible and intangible, fleeting and lasting. It forces us to question whether the things we value most are truly valuable, or whether their value is contingent upon our beliefs, our perceptions, and the systems in which we operate. It asks us to confront the possibility that value is not something fixed, but something that shifts with time, context, and our own shifting priorities. So, what does this mean for us as individuals, as consumers, or as members of society? The value paradox challenges us to think about what we truly value and why. It asks us to reflect on whether the things we pursue for their value are genuinely fulfilling, or whether we're simply chasing illusions. It's an invitation to reevaluate the way we assign worth to the things and people around us, and to consider whether we might find greater satisfaction by shifting our focus from the material to the meaningful. In the end, the value paradox leaves us with this question: is value something inherent, or is it something we create? And if value is something we create, then what does that say about our ability to shape the world and our lives according to our own perceptions and beliefs? Grandfather Paradox. Have you ever thought about what would happen if you could travel back in time and change the past? The Grandfather Paradox is one of the most famous and mind-bending paradoxes in time travel theory, challenging our understanding of cause and effect. It raises a simple yet impossible question. If you go back in time and prevent your own existence, how could you have traveled back in time in the first place? Imagine this scenario. You build a time machine and decide to travel back several decades to meet your grandfather before he had children. But then, for some reason, whether by accident or intention, you prevent him from ever meeting your grandmother. Maybe you convince him to never marry, or something even more extreme happens. The result? Your father is never born. And if your father is never born, you are never born either. But here's where the paradox kicks in. If you were never born, then how did you go back in time in the first place? If you never existed, you couldn't have traveled back to stop your grandfather, which means he would have met your grandmother, had children, and eventually led to your birth. But if you are born, then you can still go back in time and stop your grandfather, creating an endless loop of contradiction. This paradox creates a logical impossibility, a situation where an event both happens and doesn't happen at the same time. It challenges the very nature of cause and effect, making us question whether time travel to the past could ever be logically possible. Ways people try to solve the paradox. Since this paradox directly contradicts our understanding of time and logic, many theories have been proposed to explain what might actually happen if time travel were possible. Let's explore a few of them. 1. The self-consistency principle, Novikov's theory. One possible solution to the grandfather paradox is the idea that the past is already fixed and cannot be changed. This is known as Novikov's self-consistency principle, which suggests that even if you go back in time, everything you do must be consistent with the timeline that already exists. In other words, no matter what you try, you will never actually be able to change the past in a way that contradicts the present. Maybe you try to stop your grandfather, but something always goes wrong. Your gun jams, you get distracted, or circumstances somehow prevent you from succeeding. Essentially, the timeline corrects itself to prevent contradictions. This idea appears in many time travel stories, suggesting that time is like a closed loop. It may allow time travel, but it won't let you change anything that has already happened. 2. The many worlds interpretation, parallel timelines. Another popular theory is that time travel doesn't change the past of your own universe, but instead creates a new, alternate timeline. The moment you interfere with the past, you branch off into a different parallel universe, one where events unfold differently, but your original timeline remains unchanged. In this scenario, you might successfully prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, but instead of erasing yourself, you simply create a new reality where you were never born. Meanwhile, in your original timeline, nothing changes and you still exist because you came from a separate reality. This idea is supported by the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which suggests that every possible outcome of an event creates a separate, branching universe. If this is true, then time travel would simply send you to a different reality instead of altering the one you came from. 3. The timeline repair mechanism, the universe fixes itself. A third possibility is that the universe has a built-in mechanism that prevents paradoxes. This could mean that if you try to change something major, like preventing your grandfather's marriage, the universe automatically finds a way to make things work out anyway. Maybe your grandfather still ends up meeting your grandmother through different circumstances, or someone else in your family tree takes his place, ensuring that you are still born in some way. This theory is often used in fiction, where time travel can cause small changes but never anything that completely disrupts the timeline. It suggests that history has a kind of elastic nature. It can bend slightly but it always snaps back to prevent major contradictions. Real-world implications of the grandfather paradox. While time travel remains purely theoretical, the grandfather paradox has serious implications for physics, causality, and the nature of time itself. Scientists and philosophers continue to debate whether backward time travel is even possible under the laws of physics. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time is not fixed. It can stretch, bend, and slow down under certain conditions such as near a black hole. Some scientists even propose that wormholes or other cosmic phenomena could, in theory, allow travel to the past. However, the grandfather paradox raises a fundamental problem. If time travel leads to logical contradictions, does that mean it can never happen at all? Some physicists believe that any universe where time travel is possible would have to obey self-consistency, meaning that paradoxes like the grandfather paradox simply cannot occur in reality. Others suggest that if paradoxes arise, time travel itself might be an impossibility, not because the laws of physics prevent it, but because logical contradictions make it impossible for time travel to function in a way that makes sense. The grandfather paradox in pop culture. The paradox has fascinated storytellers for decades, and many famous movies, books, and TV shows explore its implications. Here are some notable examples. Back to the Future, 1985. Marty McFly accidentally prevents his parents from falling in love, putting his own existence at risk. This is a classic example of the grandfather paradox. The Terminator, 1984. A robot is sent back in time to eliminate the mother of its future enemy. But if it succeeds, the enemy never exists, so who sent the robot in the first place? Avengers, Endgame, 2019. The movie explains time travel using a version of the many worlds theory, where changing the past simply creates an alternate reality instead of altering the main timeline. These stories all grapple with the same question. Can we really change the past, or are we trapped by the very nature of time itself? Final thoughts. Can the grandfather paradox ever be solved? The grandfather paradox remains one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in time travel theory. It forces us to question how time, causality, and logic interact, and whether the past is something that can ever be changed. Perhaps the real lesson of the paradox is that time may not work the way we think it does. If time travel is ever proven possible, we may discover that reality operates under rules we can't yet comprehend. Or maybe time is like a river, flowing in one direction, unstoppable, making the past something we can observe but never alter. One thing is certain: as long as humans dream of time travel, the grandfather paradox will continue to challenge and intrigue us. Crocodile Paradox. Imagine this. A crocodile kidnaps a child and tells the parents, "I will return the child if you can correctly guess whether I will return them or not." At first glance, this seems like a simple scenario, a cruel act by a predator with an impossible riddle attached. But as we dive deeper into this situation, a fascinating paradox emerges. The crocodile paradox is one of the most intriguing logical puzzles, and it forces us to consider the nature of truth, prediction, and paradoxical thinking. The story unfolds as follows. A crocodile takes a child and promises to return them if the parents guess whether or not he will return the child. If the parents guess correctly, the child will be returned. If they guess incorrectly, the child will not be returned. Simple enough, right? The catch comes when the parents try to figure out what will happen. If they guess that the crocodile will return the child and he does, they have made the correct prediction. But if he doesn't return the child, their guess would be wrong. But here's the paradox. What happens if the parents guess that the crocodile will not return the child? In this case, the crocodile faces a dilemma. If the parents guess correctly, and the crocodile doesn't return the child, then the crocodile has broken his promise. But if the parents guess incorrectly and the crocodile returns the child, then they would have guessed wrongly, but the return of the child would render the situation even more confusing. The paradox here hinges on the concept of prediction and the uncertainty that arises when a situation is bound by the possibility of self-fulfilling or self-denying outcomes. The crocodile's word is tied to the parents' knowledge and their ability to predict the future. But how can they predict the crocodile's action when the prediction itself impacts the action in an unforeseen way? Let's break it down. The paradox works by creating a loop of uncertainty. The parents are in a position where no matter what they predict, the result will seem to contradict their prediction. If they guess that the crocodile will return the child, they are implicitly suggesting that the crocodile will stick to his word. However, if the child is returned, the parents' guess becomes correct. But at what cost? They have, in a sense, confirmed that the crocodile will follow through with his promise. But what if the parents guess that the crocodile won't return the child? In this case, the crocodile is put into a bind. If the child is not returned, the parents' guess would be correct. But this correctness would violate the agreement between the crocodile and the parents, as the promise only holds if the parents can predict the crocodile's actions. So, by the crocodile's logic, their prediction can never be correct, without either the action or the promise being broken. The real problem lies in the impossibility of creating a stable truth in this scenario. The paradox essentially forces us to confront the limitations of logical reasoning when we are asked to predict actions bound by other conditions. In this case, the very nature of the prediction creates the problem. One cannot predict the crocodile's behavior without violating the core principle of the situation, the crocodile's promise to return the child based on the parent's prediction. What this paradox teaches us is not just about logic, but about the limits of knowledge and the difficulty of making predictions in the face of complex circumstances. When predictions are tied to actions that are in turn influenced by the predictions themselves, we enter a realm of infinite loops and contradictions. The ability to forecast outcomes depends on the assumption that the outcome is independent of the prediction. But in the case of the crocodile paradox, the prediction itself is the outcome. It's also worth noting how this paradox touches on the concept of free will versus determinism. In the world of the crocodile, everything is controlled by the logic of the promise and the prediction. The parents' actions, or in this case their guesses, are constrained by the system in place. The parents cannot freely choose whether the crocodile will return the child. Their choices are directly influenced by the possibility of an unpredictable outcome. This paradox, therefore, challenges our understanding of free choice, as it questions whether predictions about the future are ever really independent of the forces that shape them. This paradox is also an excellent example of how seemingly simple statements can create complex logical problems. On the surface, it might appear that the scenario is straightforward. The crocodile kidnaps a child, and the parents must guess whether or not the child will be returned. But when we start to look at the underlying assumptions, the crocodile's promise, the conditions tied to it, and the ability to predict the future, suddenly the situation becomes a labyrinth of conflicting possibilities. And perhaps that's one of the most fascinating aspects of the crocodile paradox. It doesn't offer us a clear solution. It simply asks us to grapple with uncertainty, to question what we think we know, and to challenge our assumptions about truth and prediction. The paradox itself becomes a lesson in the limits of logical reasoning, showing us that not every puzzle has a simple answer, and sometimes the most profound insights emerge from the places where certainty fades away. As we consider the crocodile paradox, we are left with this intriguing question. If predictions about the future are inherently bound by uncertainty, what does that say about our ability to truly control or understand the outcomes of our own decisions? Can we ever be sure that the choices we make will lead to the results we expect? Or are we, like the parents in this paradox, constantly trapped in a web of uncertainty and contradictory outcomes? In the end, the crocodile paradox reminds us that logic, while powerful, can only take us so far. It shows us that sometimes the answers we seek lie beyond the reach of reason, and that in the world of prediction and uncertainty, the only thing we can be sure of is that we will never truly know what will happen next. Tolerance paradox. Imagine a society that prides itself on tolerance, a society that values acceptance of all beliefs, ideas, and practices. But what happens when tolerance itself is challenged by those who seek to undermine it? At first glance, tolerance seems like a virtue, a necessary quality for a peaceful and harmonious society. After all, tolerance allows us to coexist with people who hold different values, beliefs, and traditions. It allows us to live in a world where diversity is celebrated, where differences are acknowledged and respected, and where people are free to express their opinions without fear of persecution. But what happens when tolerance reaches its limits? Is there a point at which the very principle of tolerance becomes self-contradictory? This is the essence of the tolerance paradox. The idea that in order for a tolerant society to exist, it must also be intolerant of those who are themselves intolerant. In other words, the paradox suggests that the act of tolerating intolerance undermines the very foundation of tolerance. It raises a fundamental question. Can a society that values tolerance continue to tolerate those who do not value it? And if so, what does that say about the nature of tolerance itself? Let's break this down. Imagine a society that accepts all ideas, no matter how extreme, as long as they don't cause harm to others. This society seems to function under the principle of absolute tolerance, where freedom of thought and expression is protected at all costs. But what happens when a group within this society advocates for the suppression of freedom, for the destruction of tolerance itself? If this group is allowed to freely express their views and incite intolerance, are they not eroding the very values that make the society tolerant in the first place? This leads us to the core of the paradox. If we tolerate intolerance, are we not allowing intolerance to destroy the foundation of tolerance? In the name of preserving tolerance, we may be forced to draw the line and refuse to tolerate those who would use tolerance to destroy it. This creates a logical dilemma. How can a tolerant society remain tolerant while also defending itself against the forces of intolerance? If tolerance means accepting all views, does that mean we must accept views that are themselves hostile to tolerance? Consider a historical example. In the early 20th century, many democratic societies tolerated the rise of fascist movements. These movements, which promoted intolerance, hatred, and violence, were allowed to operate freely under the guise of free speech and expression. But ultimately, these movements became a threat to the very democratic values that allowed them to exist. The paradox became clear. The tolerance that allowed fascism to thrive also made it vulnerable to being destroyed by fascism itself. The tolerance paradox forces us to confront the limits of our own values. It challenges the idea that tolerance can be an unconditional principle. While tolerance is an essential foundation of a just and peaceful society, the paradox suggests that there must be boundaries, limits to the extent to which tolerance can be extended to those who seek to destroy the very idea of tolerance. This is not to say that we should abandon tolerance altogether, but rather that we must recognize the responsibility that comes with it. A tolerant society must also be vigilant, ready to protect itself from those who would use tolerance to undermine the society's core values. This paradox extends beyond political and social realms. It also applies to personal relationships. Consider how we, as individuals, often struggle to tolerate people who act in ways that challenge our own values or beliefs. We may believe in the importance of tolerance, but when faced with someone whose views or actions directly conflict with our own sense of morality or justice, we may find ourselves questioning the limits of that tolerance. What happens when someone expresses views that promote hate or violence, or when someone behaves in ways that are harmful to others? Should we tolerate these actions even if they go against the principles we hold dear? The personal tolerance paradox is much like the societal one. How do we navigate the tension between maintaining our own values and accepting the beliefs and actions of others, especially when those actions challenge the very principles we believe in? The paradox also has implications in the realm of cultural tolerance. In multicultural societies, tolerance is often seen as the key to maintaining peace and unity. But what happens when different cultural practices clash? How far should a society go in tolerating practices that may be harmful, discriminatory, or in conflict with its fundamental values? The idea of cultural tolerance becomes especially complex when we encounter beliefs or practices that we consider to be oppressive or unjust. Do we tolerate these practices in the name of cultural diversity, or do we draw a line to protect the rights and dignity of individuals? For example, consider the debate over freedom of speech. In many societies, we pride ourselves on the right to speak freely, to express ideas without fear of government censorship. But what happens when speech becomes harmful, when it incites violence or spreads hatred? The paradox here is clear. The right to free speech is rooted in the principle of tolerance, but when speech itself promotes intolerance, the question arises, should we tolerate intolerant speech? This question is not just theoretical, it has real-world consequences. In recent years, we've seen a growing trend of so-called hate speech on social media platforms, where individuals express views that are openly hostile to certain groups or ideas. The question of whether we should tolerate this kind of speech is a modern manifestation of the tolerance paradox. On one hand, freedom of expression is a cornerstone of democratic societies. On the other hand, unchecked hate speech can lead to real harm, inciting violence and division. How do we balance these competing values? The tolerance paradox challenges us to think critically about the boundaries of tolerance. It forces us to consider the implications of allowing intolerance to flourish under the banner of free expression. But it also reminds us that tolerance is not an all-or-nothing concept. Tolerance is about balance, about recognizing when to defend the values we hold dear and when to stand up against the forces that seek to destroy them. Ultimately, the tolerance paradox asks us to reflect on the nature of our own beliefs and values. It reminds us that no principle, no matter how virtuous, is immune to contradiction. In order to protect tolerance, we must be willing to defend it from those who would exploit it for their own ends. And in doing so, we acknowledge that tolerance is not about accepting everything. It's about understanding when to draw the line in order to preserve the very foundation of a tolerant society. So, as we consider the tolerance paradox, we are left with this challenging thought. Is there a point at which tolerance must be withheld in order to protect itself? And if so, how do we decide where that line should be drawn? In the end, tolerance is a delicate balance, a paradox that requires us to constantly examine and re-examine our values, our beliefs, and the world around us. The true test of tolerance is not how much we can accept, but how we navigate the tensions and contradictions that arise in the face of intolerance. Paradox of choice. What if having more options doesn't make us happier, but actually makes us more anxious? In a world where we're constantly told that choice is power, the idea that too many choices could actually be harmful might seem counterintuitive. But this is the essence of the paradox of choice, a concept explored in detail by psychologist Barry Schwartz. The paradox suggests that while we might think that more choices lead to greater happiness and freedom, the reality is often the opposite. An abundance of options can overwhelm us, lead to decision paralysis, and even decrease our satisfaction with the choices we make. We live in a time where choices are endless. From the moment we wake up, we are confronted with an array of decisions. What should I wear? What should I eat? Which route should I take to work? Which streaming service should I subscribe to? Which product should I buy? With so many options, it's easy to assume that we're living in the golden age of freedom to choose exactly what we want when we want it. But as the number of choices increases, something strange happens. We may feel more stressed, more uncertain, and less satisfied with our decisions. This paradox is most evident in situations where we're faced with seemingly endless options, like shopping for clothes, choosing a meal from a menu, or even picking a movie to watch. The more choices we have, the harder it becomes to make a decision. And when we finally make a choice, we may feel regret, wondering if we could have made a better one. At its core, the paradox of choice challenges the assumption that more choices are always better. It asks us to reconsider the way we think about freedom and satisfaction. If we have too many options, it's not just the decision itself that becomes harder, it's the anticipation of making the wrong choice. We become paralyzed by the fear that we might choose incorrectly, or that there's something better out there that we're missing. The overwhelming abundance of choices can make us feel less satisfied with the one we do make, because we're constantly comparing it to all the other possibilities. So, why does having too many options lead to this paradox? One reason is that the sheer number of choices creates a sense of pressure. When faced with a large variety of options, we feel the need to pick the perfect one. And because each choice carries its own set of trade-offs, we become consumed with the idea that if we make the wrong decision, we'll be worse off than if we had chosen differently. The fear of making the wrong choice becomes so overwhelming that it makes the process of decision-making itself less enjoyable. In addition to this pressure, there's also the issue of regret. The more choices we have, the more likely we are to second-guess ourselves. Even after making a decision, we might look back and wonder if there was a better option. The constant comparison between what we chose and what we could have chosen can lead to dissatisfaction, making us feel as though we've missed out on something better. This regret can be paralyzing, and it can prevent us from fully enjoying the choices we have made. Let's think about it in terms of consumer products. Imagine walking into a grocery store and being faced with 50 different kinds of cereal. Each one is marketed as the best choice with its own unique qualities. At first glance, this seems like a dream come true, so many options. But when you start to pick one, you might find yourself wondering, which one is truly the best? Which one will make me happiest? The overwhelming variety can lead to feelings of frustration, indecision, and, eventually, regret. After picking one, you might wonder if you made the right choice, or if the other options would have been a better fit. This phenomenon isn't limited to consumer products. The paradox of choice extends to all areas of life, especially when it comes to big decisions, like choosing a career path, a partner, or a place to live. The more choices we have, the more pressure we feel to pick the perfect option. And when we feel as though there is no perfect option, we experience a sense of dissatisfaction. The paradox of choice suggests that the more freedom we have to choose, the more difficult it becomes to make a choice that truly satisfies us. The paradox of choice also ties into the concept of satisficing versus maximizing. Satisficing refers to the tendency to choose the first option that meets our minimum criteria, while maximizing refers to the desire to find the absolute best choice. Satisficers are generally happier with their decisions because they don't overanalyze their options or dwell on what they could have done differently. Maximizers, on the other hand, tend to be less satisfied because they are constantly comparing their decision to what might have been. The more choices there are, the more likely a maximizer is to regret their decision and wonder if they could have chosen better. In a world full of choices, the paradox of choice suggests that we might be happier if we had fewer options to choose from. This doesn't mean we should live in a society that limits our freedom or restricts our choices. It simply means that when faced with fewer options, we're more likely to make a decision with confidence and satisfaction. When choices are limited, the pressure to make the perfect decision is reduced, and we can enjoy the options we have without being bogged down by endless comparisons. This paradox isn't just about consumer goods or major life decisions. It applies to everyday life as well. Think about the number of times you've spent hours scrolling through options on Netflix, only to end up watching something that doesn't quite live up to your expectations. Or the number of times you've spent an inordinate amount of time choosing a restaurant, only to feel dissatisfied with your meal. The vast number of choices we face on a daily basis can leave us feeling drained, frustrated, and uncertain about the decisions we make. So, what's the solution to the paradox of choice? One possibility is to embrace simplicity. We can start by narrowing down our options and eliminating the unnecessary choices that don't add value to our lives. By setting boundaries and creating systems to help us make decisions more efficiently, we can reduce the pressure and anxiety that come with an overwhelming number of options. In essence, the goal is to focus on what truly matters and let go of the need to maximize every decision. Another solution is to embrace imperfection. Instead of seeking the perfect choice, we can learn to be satisfied with the choices we make, knowing that no decision is without trade-offs. By accepting that every choice comes with its own set of benefits and drawbacks, we can let go of the constant need to compare and regret, and instead focus on enjoying the experience. Ultimately, the paradox of choice reminds us that having more options doesn't always lead to more happiness. In fact, it can often lead to greater dissatisfaction, anxiety, and regret. By simplifying our choices and embracing the satisfaction of good enough, we can free ourselves from the burden of endless options and start making decisions with greater confidence and contentment. So, the next time you're faced with a difficult decision, ask yourself, am I really happier with all these choices, or would I be more satisfied with fewer options and a clearer sense of direction? In the end, the true freedom may lie not in having more choices, but in knowing when to choose less. Catch-22. Do you know about the Catch-22 paradox? It's one of the most frustrating and mind-twisting situations a person can experience. It describes a scenario where you are trapped in a problem with no logical way out, where the very conditions needed to escape are the same ones preventing you from doing so. No matter which choice you make, you're stuck. The term Catch-22 was made famous by Joseph Heller's novel of the same name, but the concept itself is much older, and it appears everywhere in life: bureaucracies, workplaces, military rules, and even personal dilemmas. At its core, Catch-22 is a self-contradictory rule or situation that leaves a person with no real options. It's like being told, you're free to do whatever you want as long as you follow the rules, when the rules themselves make it impossible to act freely. It's a paradox that creates a cycle, trapping a person in an endless loop of frustration. The best-known example of Catch-22 comes directly from the novel. The story follows a World War II bombardier named Captain Yassarian, who is desperate to escape the war. The military has a rule: if a pilot is insane, he doesn't have to fly dangerous missions. However, to be declared insane, the pilot has to request removal from duty. But here's the paradox: if a pilot is sane enough to recognize that flying dangerous missions is a bad idea and asks to be grounded, that means he's rational. Therefore, he isn't insane and must continue flying. On the other hand, if he's truly insane, he won't request removal at all, meaning he'll keep flying anyway. Either way, there's no escape. That's Catch-22, a trap where both choices lead to the same impossible outcome. But this paradox doesn't just exist in fiction. It's everywhere in real life. Take, for example, the classic job hunting dilemma. Many employers require job applicants to have work experience before they can be hired. But how can you gain work experience if no one will hire you because you don't have work experience? That's a Catch-22. You need the job to gain experience, but you need experience to get the job. The very thing required to solve the problem is blocked by the problem itself. Another common Catch-22 happens in bureaucracies and government systems. Imagine applying for a loan or government assistance. The rules might say that in order to qualify, you need to provide proof of income. But if you had a stable income, you wouldn't need financial help in the first place. You're required to show something that contradicts the very reason you're applying in the first place. Think about the paradox in medical situations as well. Some hospitals won't provide treatment unless a patient has health insurance. But the reason many people don't have insurance is because they can't afford it. And if they can't afford it, they can't get treated. Another catch-22. You need healthcare because you're sick, but you need to be healthy enough financially to afford healthcare. This paradox appears in personal life too. Imagine a scenario where someone is told, to be trusted, you need to prove you're trustworthy. But how can you prove you're trustworthy if no one is willing to trust you in the first place? Or consider relationships where someone is advised, just be confident and people will like you. But if confidence comes from positive social experiences, how can someone develop confidence when they're struggling to fit in? The requirement to succeed is the very thing being denied. Catch-22 situations don't always come from written rules. Sometimes they are a result of the way society works. Take the paradox of needing money to make money. Many investments, businesses, and opportunities require an initial amount of capital to get started. But if someone doesn't already have money, they can't invest, which means they can't make money. The solution to their problem, getting money, is blocked by the problem itself, not having money. One of the most frustrating things about catch-22 situations is that they often seem intentionally designed to prevent change. Large systems, whether it's corporations, governments, or social structures, sometimes create loops that keep people in the same place, making it nearly impossible to break free. Bureaucracies, for example, are famous for creating rules that contradict themselves, trapping people in endless cycles of paperwork and regulations. But is there a way to escape a catch-22? Sometimes the only way out is to break the system. People often have to find loopholes, push against the rules, or think outside the box to escape these paradoxes. In the novel, Captain Yossarian eventually realizes that the only way to beat catch-22 is to refuse to play by its rules. Instead of looking for an official way out, he finds an unconventional escape, deserting the military altogether. It's not an ideal solution, but it's the only one that works. In real life, some people find ways to work around catch-22 situations. If a job requires experience, sometimes an internship, freelancing, or volunteering can act as a workaround. If a system blocks people from getting healthcare, new policies or community efforts may help people bypass the barriers. Many of the biggest changes in society, whether in law, business, or personal life, come from people who refuse to accept a catch-22 as an unbreakable rule and instead found a way around it. But not every catch-22 has a solution. Some are so deeply embedded in the system that they feel impossible to escape. The paradox forces us to question how rules, policies, and expectations are designed. Sometimes the only way to truly fix a catch-22 is to change the system itself. But until that happens, people will continue facing these impossible loops, where the only way to get what they need is to already have it, and where every path forward leads back to the same dead end. The power of catch-22 is in how it highlights the absurdity of many situations we accept as normal. It exposes flaws in logic, unfair rules, and the frustrating loops that keep people stuck. It makes us ask, how many of the rules we follow actually make sense? And how often do we accept a catch-22 without realizing that the only way out is to break the cycle? Next time you find yourself in a situation where every choice leads to the same problem, ask yourself, is this really an unavoidable rule, or is it just a catch-22 waiting to be challenged? Friendship Paradox. What if the people closest to you, the ones you trust the most, are actually the ones you understand the least? At first glance, friendship seems like one of the most straightforward relationships we experience. We meet someone, we bond, we share our lives. But in reality, friendships are far more complex than we give them credit for. How well do we truly know our friends? And, more intriguingly, how often do we really understand ourselves through them? Friendship, like any relationship, is built on trust, mutual respect, and shared experiences. But these foundations can sometimes be deceptive. What happens when trust is misinterpreted? When a shared experience brings out unexpected truths? The paradox lies in how we, as humans, often don't notice the subtle shifts that occur in our connections with others, even those we consider our closest friends. Let's take a moment and think about this. We spend years of our lives with people we consider our closest companions, yet if we pause and reflect, how many of us can truly say we know the depth of their thoughts, their fears, their dreams? It's easy to believe we know someone well, especially when we've shared countless moments with them. But could it be that what we know is only a surface-level glimpse? Perhaps, deep down, we project our own desires, beliefs, and experiences onto them, filling the gaps of what we don't fully understand with assumptions. Isn't that a bit like creating a version of them in our minds, one that exists only because we need it to? Here's another question. Is it possible that, through our friends, we discover more about who we are than we ever could on our own? They challenge our views, they reflect our emotions, and in some cases they help shape our identity. So, when we look at our friends, are we really seeing them, or are we seeing pieces of ourselves reflected back? What if this paradox is not a flaw in how we relate to others, but rather an essential part of human nature? What if the beauty of friendship lies not in the perfect understanding of each other, but in the complexity, the mystery, and the shared journey of figuring each other out? Friendship is often seen as a refuge, a safe haven where we can lay down our masks, stop performing, and simply exist. But even in these moments of openness, is there truly such a thing as full transparency? Or do we keep certain parts of ourselves hidden, even from our closest friends? The paradox deepens as we consider that the more we know someone, the more we realize how little we truly know. There's a famous saying, "The more I get to know people, the more I realize I don't know them." This statement speaks to the complexity of human nature, suggesting that even in the closest relationships, there are layers of personality and experience that remain hidden. What we reveal to each other is shaped by countless factors: our fears, our desires, our insecurities, and sometimes even by our need for validation. Are we truly showing each other who we are, or are we presenting a carefully curated version of ourselves? Take a moment to think about a time when a close friend revealed something about themselves that surprised you. Perhaps it was a fear, an insecurity, or an ambition you never knew existed. It might have made you feel closer to them, or perhaps it made you question how well you really knew them. In either case, these revelations can feel unsettling, as if the friend you thought you understood is suddenly an enigma once again. Now think about this. Have you ever had a moment where you felt you were hiding parts of yourself from your friends or even from yourself? In a way, we all wear masks in our relationships. Sometimes these masks are subtle, small adjustments we make to fit in or to avoid judgment. Other times, they are more significant, pieces of ourselves that we choose to keep hidden because we fear vulnerability or rejection. In friendship, we navigate these masks together, often without even realizing it. We present one version of ourselves to one friend, and another to someone else. We adapt based on context, environment, and our understanding of the other person's expectations. But does this mean that we ever fully reveal who we truly are? Or is the act of masking simply another layer in the complex dance of understanding and being understood? This paradox becomes especially evident in moments of conflict. When disagreements arise, the differences between two people, no matter how close they may be, become glaring. In these moments, the illusions we hold about each other start to crack. The friend who once seemed to share our worldview suddenly seems like a stranger. We may even wonder if we ever truly knew them at all. But here's an intriguing thought. Is this confrontation with difference an essential part of friendship? Could it be that the conflicts and misunderstandings we experience are necessary for us to grow and evolve, both individually and together? After all, without contrast, how would we ever learn to appreciate the depth of our connections? Consider this. The moments of discomfort, tension, and even frustration in friendship often lead to the most profound revelations. It's in these moments that we are forced to confront not just the other person, but also our own assumptions, biases, and expectations. These moments reveal that understanding is not a static thing. It's something that evolves over time, shaped by experiences, challenges, and shared growth. In a way, the paradox of friendship mirrors the paradox of self-discovery. We spend our lives searching for meaning, for understanding, and for connection. Yet, no matter how much we uncover about ourselves and others, there will always be more to learn. The deeper we go, the more questions arise. And that's the beauty of it. The mystery isn't something to fear, it's something to embrace. If we could fully understand another person, if we could truly know everything about them, would the relationship lose its spark? Would we still find joy in the act of discovery? Or is it the very unknowns that make our friendships worth having? In some ways, friendships are like puzzles, complex, multifaceted, and full of missing pieces. The pieces we do have can bring us closer, but the missing ones? They add to the allure. It's in the mystery, the unanswered questions, that we find the potential for deeper connection. And perhaps, the most profound paradox of all is that, despite all of this uncertainty, we continue to seek out these relationships. We continue to open ourselves up to the mystery of each other, knowing full well that we may never fully understand the other person, and they may never fully understand us. But maybe that's the point. So, as we reflect on the nature of friendship, we are left with this lingering thought. Is the true value of friendship found in the bond we create, or in the ongoing mystery of never fully understanding the other person? Perhaps the real question isn't about how well we know our friends, but rather how willing we are to explore the unknowns together. To accept that we are all, in some way, mysteries, and that the journey of friendship is not about solving those mysteries, but about embracing them, learning from them, and growing with them. As we continue to navigate the complexities of our relationships, maybe we can take comfort in the fact that the paradox of friendship is not something to solve. It's something to cherish. Grand Hotel Paradox. Do you know about the Grand Hotel Paradox? It's one of the most mind-bending and fascinating paradoxes in mathematics and logic. At first, it seems like an ordinary puzzle, but the more you think about it, the more impossible it feels. It challenges how we understand infinity itself and forces us to rethink what we believe is possible. Imagine a hotel. But not just any hotel. This is the Grand Hotel, an infinite hotel with an unlimited number of rooms. No matter how many guests arrive, there's always a place for them to stay. Sounds simple, right? But here's where things get strange. Even if every single room in the hotel is already occupied, the manager can still make space for new guests. How is that possible? Welcome to the mind-twisting world of Hilbert's Hotel Paradox, where infinity plays by its own set of rules. Let's start with the basic idea. Suppose the hotel is completely full, every room is occupied by a guest. Now imagine that a new traveler arrives and asks for a room. In a normal hotel this would be a problem. If every room is taken, there's nowhere left to stay. But in the Grand Hotel, the manager has a clever trick. He asks each guest to move one room down. The guest in room 1 moves to room 2, the guest in room 2 moves to room 3, the guest in room 3 moves to room 4, and so on. Since the hotel has an infinite number of rooms, this shifting can continue forever. And just like that, room 1 is now empty and available for the new guest, even though the hotel was supposedly full. That's strange enough on its own, but let's take it a step further. Suppose a bus pulls up outside carrying not one, but an infinite number of new guests. In a normal hotel, this would be an absolute disaster. There would be no way to accommodate an infinite number of new people when all the rooms are already occupied. But the Grand Hotel has another trick. Instead of shifting guests one room down, the manager asks every current guest to move to the room that is double their current room number. The guest in room 1 moves to room 2, the guest in room 2 moves to room 4, the guest in room 3 moves to room 6, and so on. By doing this, every guest moves into an even-numbered room, leaving all the odd-numbered rooms empty. And since there are infinitely many odd numbers, there is now space for an infinite number of new guests, who can fill the odd-numbered rooms. Once again, an already full hotel finds a way to fit an infinite number of newcomers. But let's go even further. Suppose an infinite number of buses arrive, each carrying an infinite number of guests. Now we're dealing with infinity stacked on top of infinity. Surely now the hotel must be overwhelmed, right? But infinity doesn't work the way normal numbers do. The hotel manager has another plan. This time he assigns every existing guest a new room using powers of prime numbers. Each current guest moves into a room labeled with 2 raised to their current room number. So the guest in room 1 moves to room 2, which is 2 to the power of 1. The guest in room 2 moves to room 4, 2 squared. The guest in room 3 moves to room 8, 2 cubed, and so on. Since prime numbers create a unique sequence that never repeats, this shifting opens up an entirely new sequence of rooms for the arriving guests. At this point, it's clear that something very strange is happening. The Grand Hotel, which was already full to begin with, has found ways to accommodate an infinite number of guests again and again. This is because infinity isn't like a normal number, it behaves in ways that defy our everyday logic. In the real world, if something is full, there's no space left. But in the world of infinity, being full doesn't mean you can't add more. This paradox was first introduced by the German mathematician David Hilbert, and it's one of the most famous thought experiments in mathematics. It reveals a fundamental truth about infinite sets. Not all infinities are the same. We tend to think of infinity as a single, unchanging concept, but in reality, there are different sizes of infinity. The number of natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, is one type of infinity. The number of real numbers, which includes fractions, decimals, and irrationals, is an even larger infinity. In fact, some infinities are so vast that they can't be counted in any way that makes sense to us. The Grand Hotel Paradox shows us that infinity is not just a really big number, it's a completely different way of thinking about numbers. And this has profound implications not just in math but in philosophy, physics, and even our daily lives. For example, in physics, some theories suggest that the universe might be infinite. If that's true, does that mean there are infinite versions of you somewhere out there, just slightly different? If time is infinite, Does that mean everything that can happen must happen eventually? These are the kinds of questions that arise when we start thinking about infinity not just as an abstract idea, but as something that might describe reality itself. Another way this paradox challenges our thinking is in the idea of limits. If a hotel has infinite rooms, can we really say it's ever full? If we can always add more guests, then what does it even mean to have all rooms occupied? The paradox forces us to question the very meaning of numbers, space, and capacity. But here's a deeper question. What if someone wanted to leave the Grand Hotel? In a normal hotel, if a guest checks out, the number of occupied rooms decreases. But in an infinite hotel, removing one guest doesn't make a difference at all. There are still infinitely many guests left. Even removing an infinite number of guests might not change the total occupancy, depending on how they're removed. This is another strange property of infinity. You can subtract from it and still be left with infinity. The Grand Hotel Paradox is more than just a mathematical trick. It's a mind-expanding way to explore infinity. It challenges our assumptions about size, space, and numbers, showing us that infinity doesn't behave the way we expect it to. Whether we're thinking about time, space, or even the limits of knowledge, infinity opens doors to ideas that seem impossible at first glance. So next time you hear someone say something is infinite, remember the Grand Hotel. Infinity isn't just big, it's strange, mysterious, and full of surprises. In the end, maybe the real paradox isn't just about the hotel, it's about how little we truly understand infinity itself. Bootstrap Paradox. The Bootstrap Paradox is a mind-bending concept in the realm of time travel and causality. It is a type of time paradox in which an object or piece of information is sent back in time, becoming the catalyst for its own existence in the future. Essentially, the paradox involves a scenario where something exists without ever having been created in the traditional sense because it is passed back and forth through time in a loop, making its origin unclear or even non-existent. This creates a puzzling and seemingly impossible situation where cause and effect lose their traditional structure. The term Bootstrap Paradox derives from the phrase, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, which refers to an impossible or self-sustaining action. In the context of the paradox, it describes the idea of an object or piece of knowledge being self-generated across time. One of the most famous examples of the Bootstrap Paradox involves time travel. Imagine a person who travels to the past and gives Shakespeare a copy of his works, including Hamlet. Shakespeare, inspired by this, writes Hamlet and claims it as his own. The person from the future then returns to their own time, where they find Shakespeare's works, including Hamlet, and uses them to travel back to the past. Here the question arises, who actually created Hamlet? Did Shakespeare write it or did the time traveler? The works exist in the loop without a clear origin, creating a paradox in which the cause is inseparable from the effect. The paradox raises questions about the nature of time, causality, and how events are connected. In a linear time system, we expect that one event follows another in a clear sequence of cause and effect. The Bootstrap Paradox challenges this by suggesting that time may not be as linear as we imagine, and that events can be self-contained in loops where cause and effect become tangled. This creates a situation where information, objects, or actions appear to have no origin because they are effectively created by themselves across time. The implications of the Bootstrap Paradox extend beyond the realms of science fiction and time travel. In many ways, it asks us to reconsider our understanding of the universe and the flow of time. If an object or idea can exist without an origin, does that mean time itself is not bound by linear constraints? Can we have objects that exist in a loop without needing a clear starting point? These questions push the limits of our understanding and force us to confront the possibility of a nonlinear universe where causality is not as rigid as we might assume. There are also several variations of the Bootstrap Paradox that explore different nuances of time travel and causality. For instance, one might imagine a scenario in which a person travels to the past, learns a piece of crucial knowledge, and then returns to the future to use that knowledge to change the past. In this version, the paradox arises when the knowledge seems to have no origin, as it is continuously passed through time from the future to the past and back again, existing in a loop without any clear beginning. This iteration of the paradox questions not just the origin of objects or information, but also the stability of the timeline itself. If actions can be taken in the past that alter the future, and these actions loop back to influence the past, then is the timeline even stable? Or does it simply exist in a constant state of flux, with no definitive cause and effect? One of the most intriguing aspects of the Bootstrap Paradox is how it reflects the uncertainty and mystery surrounding time travel in science fiction. Many time travel stories play with the idea of paradoxes, showing how traveling backward in time can have unpredictable consequences. The Bootstrap Paradox is unique in that it suggests a form of time travel where the paradox is not about changing the past or future, but about the very existence of objects or information without a clear source. This creates a sense of cyclical causality, where everything is both the cause and the effect in an ongoing loop. It raises the question of whether time itself is an ever-present loop of events that don't rely on a definitive origin or endpoint. While the Bootstrap Paradox is a compelling concept, it also challenges our traditional understanding of logic and causality. In everyday life, we are accustomed to thinking in terms of cause and effect, where an action leads to a consequence. The Bootstrap Paradox turns this understanding on its head, suggesting that events may be interdependent in such a way that the normal flow of time is distorted. The idea that something can exist without a true origin forces us to rethink how we define existence, creation, and the passage of time. It invites us to ask whether reality is truly as linear as we experience it, or whether there is a deeper, more intricate structure of cause and effect that we don't fully understand. The paradox has been explored in various works of science fiction, most notably in stories about time loops and time travel. In one popular example, a time traveler might receive an object from their future self, only to travel back in time and give it to their past self. The object exists because it was passed back and forth through time, but no one can determine who originally created it. The paradox in this case revolves around the object's origin. Without a clear beginning, the object's existence seems to violate the principle of causality, which states that every effect must have a cause. Yet, in the context of time travel, this paradox becomes a fascinating tool for exploring the limits of time and the implications of actions taken in the past on the present and future. While the Bootstrap Paradox remains firmly in the realm of theoretical discussions and science fiction, it presents an opportunity to think critically about the nature of time and the universe. It challenges our notions of how cause and effect work, and it invites us to reconsider what is possible within the fabric of reality. Whether time travel will ever become a reality is uncertain, but the paradox itself serves as a captivating thought experiment that pushes the boundaries of our understanding. It forces us to question not only the flow of time but also the very structure of existence itself, as we contemplate the possibility of a universe where the past, present, and future are inextricably linked in a self-sustaining loop of events with no clear starting point. In conclusion, the Bootstrap Paradox is a captivating concept that delves into the complexities of time travel, causality, and existence. It invites us to consider a world where objects, ideas, and actions are perpetually recycled through time, raising deep philosophical questions about the nature of reality and the possibility of time loops. While it may exist only in theory or fiction for now, the paradox encourages us to stretch our imaginations and challenge our assumptions about how time works, reminding us that our understanding of the universe may not be as straightforward as it seems. Zeno's paradoxes. What if motion itself was an illusion? What if, no matter how fast you move, you could never truly reach your destination? This is the strange and puzzling world of Zeno's paradoxes, a collection of ancient philosophical dilemmas that challenge our very understanding of space, time, and movement. One of the most famous is Achilles and the tortoise. Imagine the mighty Achilles racing against a slow-moving tortoise. Out of generosity, he gives the tortoise a head start. But according to Zeno, Achilles can never overtake it. Why? Because every time he reaches the point where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved slightly ahead. This continues infinitely, making it seem as though Achilles can never catch up. Mathematically, this paradox suggests that an infinite number of steps must be completed before Achilles reaches the tortoise. However, modern calculus shows that this infinite sum converges to a finite number, proving Achilles does indeed pass the tortoise. Yet, does this truly resolve the paradox, or does it raise deeper questions about the nature of infinity? Then there's the dichotomy paradox. Before reaching a destination, you must first reach the halfway point. But before that, you must reach a quarter of the way, and before that, an eighth. This division continues infinitely, suggesting that motion itself is impossible, because you can never finish an infinite number of steps. This paradox highlights the problem of infinite divisibility. If every journey consists of an infinite number of smaller steps, how is movement possible at all? Once again, calculus provides an answer. The sum of an infinite series can have a finite limit. But this mathematical explanation doesn't eliminate the paradox entirely, it simply reframes it. Zeno proposed yet another paradox to challenge our understanding of motion, the arrow paradox. He argued that if we freeze time at any given instant, an arrow in flight appears motionless. Since time consists of an infinite series of these instants, how can the arrow ever truly move? This paradox forces us to rethink the nature of time. Is time continuous or does it progress in discrete steps? If movement is just a sequence of still frames, does that mean our perception of motion is an illusion? Quantum mechanics and relativity add further complexity to these questions, suggesting that time itself may not behave as our intuition suggests. Zeno's paradoxes are not just abstract thought experiments. They have influenced mathematics, physics, and philosophy for centuries. The development of calculus by Newton and Leibniz helped resolve many of the paradoxes by introducing the concept of limits. However, modern physics brings new challenges. In quantum mechanics, particles do not move in a smooth, continuous manner. Instead, they exist in probabilistic states, suggesting that reality may not be as straightforward as classical physics assumes. Similarly, Einstein's theory of relativity shows that time and space are not absolute, adding further depth to the discussion of motion and its paradoxes. If motion can be questioned at such a fundamental level, what does this say about reality itself? Are we perceiving an illusion, a construct of the mind designed to make sense of a universe that operates in ways we cannot fully comprehend? Zeno's paradoxes force us to confront these uncertainties. They remind us that even the most basic aspects of existence, movement, time, and space, are not as simple as they seem. Whether through philosophy, mathematics, or physics, the quest to understand these paradoxes continues. So what do you think? Do Zeno's paradoxes reveal a flaw in our perception, or are they simply tricks of logic that have been resolved by modern science? Are we truly moving forward, or are we forever trapped in an infinite sequence of steps, much like Achilles chasing the tortoise? Perhaps the answer lies not in solving the paradoxes, but in embracing the mysteries they reveal about the nature of reality. Unexpected hanging paradox. Do you know about the unexpected hanging paradox? It's one of the most puzzling and self-contradictory paradoxes in logic, creating an endless loop of reasoning that seems to defy itself. At first glance, it appears to be a simple problem of prediction, but as you dive deeper, you realize that no matter how logically you approach it, something always seems off. The paradox is often told in the form of a story. A judge informs a prisoner that he will be hanged at noon on a weekday in the coming week, but the exact day of the execution will be a surprise. The prisoner will not know the day of the hanging until the executioner arrives at his cell that morning. In other words, when the execution happens, it must be unexpected. The prisoner, being a logical thinker, starts analyzing the situation carefully. He reasons, if the hanging were to take place on Friday, then by Thursday night, he would know that Friday is the only remaining day. That means the execution wouldn't be unexpected, which contradicts the judge's statement. So the hanging cannot happen on Friday. Since Friday is ruled out, the prisoner now considers Thursday. But if the execution hasn't happened by Wednesday night, then Thursday becomes the only remaining possibility. Once again, the execution would no longer be unexpected. So Thursday is also impossible. Using the same logic, he rules out Wednesday, Tuesday, and finally Monday. Since all 5 weekdays are eliminated, the prisoner concludes that the execution cannot happen at all. He believes the judge's statement is a paradox, and he confidently assumes that he will survive the week. However, to his shock, the executioner arrives on Wednesday and prepares the hanging. The prisoner is completely surprised, just as the judge predicted. The paradox lies in the fact that the prisoner's logical reasoning led him to believe the execution was impossible, yet it still happened, proving him wrong. So what went wrong? At first, the prisoner's reasoning seems flawless. He follows logic step by step, ruling out each day based on the assumption that he will be able to predict the hanging. But the key to the paradox is that his logic depends on him knowing the outcome in advance. In reality, his reasoning only works if he reaches the final day without being hanged, which never happens. The surprise element remains intact because the prisoner assumes he will always be able to deduce the execution date before it happens, but the very nature of the paradox ensures that he never gets to that point. This paradox is deeply connected to self-reference and logical contradiction. It creates a cycle where the act of trying to predict the event makes it unpredictable. The prisoner's mistake is assuming that he can logically rule out all the days, when in fact, his reasoning collapses the moment the execution happens earlier than he expects. But the unexpected hanging paradox isn't just a fun thought experiment. It has deep implications in philosophy, probability, and epistemology, the study of knowledge. It challenges our understanding of what it means to know something and whether absolute logical deduction can always apply in real-world situations. For example, this paradox is related to Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which state that in any logical system, there will always be statements that are true but unprovable within the system itself. Just like the prisoner's reasoning collapses on itself, many mathematical and philosophical systems contain truths that cannot be fully explained using their own internal logic. It also connects to the liar paradox, where a sentence contradicts itself. If someone says, "This statement is false," is it true or false? If it's true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. Just like the prisoner's logic, this kind of reasoning creates an endless loop that can't be resolved in a straightforward way. In a practical sense, the unexpected hanging paradox also mirrors real-life situations where overanalyzing an event leads to unexpected outcomes. In economics, politics, and even psychology, people often try to predict future events based on existing patterns. However, some events remain unpredictable precisely because people try to predict them. For example, in financial markets, when too many investors expect a crash and act accordingly, their actions prevent the crash from happening, or trigger it earlier than expected. The paradox also applies to game theory. Suppose a general announces that they will attack an enemy at an unexpected time. If the enemy tries to predict the attack based on logic, they might fall into the same trap as the prisoner, assuming the attack can't happen at all. But the attack does happen, proving that their reasoning was flawed. So, what can we learn from this paradox? It teaches us that not everything can be deduced through rigid logic alone. Some systems, especially those involving self-reference, uncertainty, and surprise, operate differently from predictable cause and effect reasoning. Sometimes, the more we try to outthink a system, the more we trap ourselves in our own logic. In the end, the unexpected hanging paradox is more than just a story about a prisoner and a judge. It's a profound reminder that even the sharpest reasoning can fail when faced with the unknown. So, next time you think you've outsmarted a problem completely, ask yourself, am I really ahead of the game, or am I just like the prisoner, waiting for the surprise to prove me wrong? Confirmation paradox. The confirmation paradox, also known as the paradox of confirmation, is a fascinating problem in philosophy and logic that challenges our understanding of evidence, belief, and how we justify the truth of a claim. It arises when the process of confirming a hypothesis or belief leads to paradoxical or counterintuitive results. The paradox specifically highlights how the confirmation of a hypothesis might not always increase its likelihood of being true, and in some cases, can actually provide misleading or insufficient grounds for belief. This issue touches on key areas of epistemology, the study of knowledge, and the philosophy of science. To understand the confirmation paradox, let's consider a classic example. Suppose we have a hypothesis: all swans are white. This hypothesis is, of course, a generalization, and we seek evidence to confirm or deny it. We observe swans in various places, and over time, we see nothing but white swans. Every time we encounter a new white swan, we gain additional evidence in support of our hypothesis. In a straightforward sense, the more white swans we see, the more confident we become in the truth of the statement, all swans are white. However, if we were to encounter a black swan, the hypothesis would be immediately falsified. At first glance, the confirmation process seems logical. Seeing more white swans increases our confidence in the claim. But the paradox lies in the fact that we could have an unlimited number of white swans without ever truly confirming the hypothesis. The more we observe white swans, the more data we accumulate, but this accumulation may not be as reliable as it seems. The paradox emerges because simply observing white swans does not rule out the possibility that black swans exist somewhere in the world. The observations that confirm our hypothesis may, in fact, provide a skewed or insufficient basis for belief because they don't account for the unknown counterexamples. A key problem raised by the confirmation paradox is the issue of how we define evidence and the role it plays in strengthening or weakening our beliefs. In the case of the swans, we might argue that we have strong evidence supporting the hypothesis that all swans are white, but we can't ever be fully certain without verifying every swan in the world, which is impossible. The accumulation of white swan sightings doesn't guarantee that the hypothesis is true. It simply fails to disprove it, while the possibility of discovering a black swan, or other counterexamples, remains a lurking threat to the claim. This paradox has significant implications for scientific and everyday reasoning. In science, researchers are often looking for ways to confirm hypotheses, but the confirmation paradox reminds us that confirmation alone isn't enough to guarantee the truth of a theory. A hypothesis can be confirmed through numerous observations and experiments, yet it may still be false if future counterexamples emerge. This highlights a fundamental issue in inductive reasoning, the process by which we generalize from specific observations to broader conclusions. The paradox shows us that no matter how many observations we make that seem to support a hypothesis, we cannot be absolutely certain of its truth without the possibility of future refutation. The confirmation paradox also invites us to reconsider our reliance on evidence that confirms our beliefs. Humans have a tendency to seek out information that supports what they already believe, a phenomenon known as confirmation bias. This bias can make us more likely to interpret evidence in a way that supports our pre-existing views, while discounting or ignoring evidence that contradicts them. The confirmation paradox helps highlight how even well-intentioned attempts to confirm a hypothesis can be misleading if we fail to consider the possibility of contradictory evidence. If we are overly focused on confirming our beliefs, we might ignore or fail to recognize factors that would challenge those beliefs, ultimately leading us to form inaccurate or incomplete conclusions. In everyday life, the confirmation paradox can manifest in situations where we become overly confident in our understanding of a situation based on selective or incomplete evidence. For example, if someone strongly believes that a particular brand of car is reliable, they might focus only on the instances where the car performs well, while dismissing or downplaying instances where the car breaks down. In this case, the person's belief in the reliability of the car is confirmed by positive experiences, but the paradox arises because they are not accounting for the broader set of experiences, including the potential for breakdowns or problems. The person's selective attention to confirming evidence reinforces their belief, even if the overall truth of the car's reliability is more complex than they perceive. The confirmation paradox also connects to issues in decision-making and critical thinking. It asks us to consider how we weigh evidence and whether we should place more value on confirming information or seek a more balanced view that includes potential counterexamples. The paradox highlights the importance of maintaining skepticism and openness to disconfirming evidence, because while confirming evidence may support our hypothesis or belief, it is the disconfirming evidence that ultimately helps us refine or revise our understanding. Philosophers have long debated how best to address the confirmation paradox. One influential response comes from the philosopher Karl Popper, who proposed a method of falsification over confirmation. According to Popper, the key to scientific progress is not to seek confirmation of hypotheses, but rather to attempt to falsify them, looking for evidence that could potentially disprove the theory. In this framework, a hypothesis is considered scientific if it can be tested and potentially refuted, rather than simply confirmed. This approach emphasizes the idea that a theory that survives attempts to disprove it is more reliable than one that is only supported by confirming evidence. Popper's focus on falsifiability shifts the emphasis from accumulation of confirming evidence to a more rigorous process of testing and challenging ideas. Other responses to the confirmation paradox focus on refining our understanding of evidence and probability. In Bayesian reasoning, for example, the probability of a hypothesis being true is updated as new evidence is acquired. This approach allows for a more nuanced view of confirmation, where the strength of evidence can be measured not just in terms of whether it confirms a hypothesis, but also in terms of how much it changes our belief in the likelihood of that hypothesis being true. Bayesian reasoning incorporates the idea that evidence should be evaluated in light of prior knowledge and that a hypothesis can be confirmed to varying degrees, rather than with absolute certainty. This approach helps address the paradox by providing a more flexible framework for understanding how evidence contributes to belief. Ultimately, the confirmation paradox forces us to confront the limitations of inductive reasoning and challenges us to reconsider how we justify our beliefs. It encourages us to be cautious when interpreting evidence and to recognize the potential for confirmation bias, which can lead us to reinforce flawed or incomplete ideas. It reminds us that confirmation alone is not sufficient to guarantee the truth of a claim and that we must be open to disconfirming evidence in order to achieve a more accurate understanding of the world. In conclusion, the confirmation paradox is an important philosophical problem that addresses the complexities of evidence, belief, and the process of confirming hypotheses. It highlights the limitations of inductive reasoning and challenges the idea that accumulation of confirming evidence is enough to justify belief. The paradox also reminds us of the dangers of confirmation bias and the importance of remaining open to disconfirming evidence in the pursuit of truth. Whether in science, decision-making, or everyday life, the confirmation paradox encourages us to think more critically about the evidence we gather and how we interpret it, ensuring that we form beliefs that are grounded in a more complete and objective understanding of the world. Barber Paradox. Imagine a small town with a peculiar rule: there is only one barber, and he shaves every man who does not shave himself. Now here's the paradox. Who shaves the barber? If he shaves himself, then according to the rule he must not shave himself. But if he does not shave himself, then he must shave himself. A contradiction emerges, revealing the logical trap at the heart of the Barber Paradox. This paradox, formulated by Bertrand Russell, is more than just an amusing puzzle. It's a simplified version of his more famous Russell's paradox, which exposed contradictions in set theory. The Barber Paradox highlights the dangers of self-referential definitions, where a rule tries to apply to itself and collapses under its own weight. At first glance, it seems like a simple oversight in logic. But deeper analysis reveals that the paradox is not just about a fictional barber, it challenges the very way we construct logical systems. Can a set define itself without contradiction? Can a rule govern itself without creating a loophole? These are fundamental questions in logic, mathematics, and even computer science. One way to resolve the paradox is to acknowledge that such a barber cannot exist. The rule defining him is inherently contradictory, meaning no real-world scenario can satisfy it. In mathematics, this leads to refinements in set theory, ensuring that self-referential definitions are handled more carefully. The Barber Paradox also has implications beyond pure logic. In law, governance, and ethics, self-referential systems can lead to contradictions. Consider a legal system where a law states that all laws must be approved by the citizens, but another law states that citizens cannot approve laws themselves. The contradiction creates an impossible situation, much like the barber's dilemma. Similarly, in artificial intelligence and programming, self-referential commands can lead to infinite loops or logical errors. If a program is designed to check whether a condition applies to all cases, but it must also check itself, it can fall into a paradoxical loop, making resolution impossible without additional constraints. Philosophically, the Barber Paradox raises deeper questions about the nature of self-reference and existence. If an entity is defined purely by its relationship to other entities, does it have an independent existence at all? Can a system that defines itself avoid collapsing into contradiction? At its core, the paradox serves as a reminder of the limits of logic. While logic strives to create consistency and order, paradoxes like this one reveal the hidden flaws in even our most carefully constructed systems. So, what do you think? Is the Barber Paradox just a trick of wording, or does it expose a deeper flaw in the way we think about rules and definitions? If a logical system can contradict itself, how much can we trust any rule-based framework? Perhaps the lesson here is not just about barbers or logic, but about the delicate balance between structure and contradiction in every system we create. Lottery Paradox. The lottery paradox is a philosophical puzzle that arises when we consider the conflict between individual belief and collective knowledge in probabilistic scenarios. It's based on a simple situation: a lottery with many tickets, one of which is a winner and the rest are losers. In this situation, each participant can justifiably believe that their ticket will not win. However, since exactly one ticket is destined to win, this creates a paradox where each individual's belief contradicts the collective knowledge of the system. Let's break this down step by step and explore the intricacies of the paradox. Imagine a lottery with 1,000 tickets. Each ticket has an equal chance of winning, and we know that exactly one ticket will win. The probability of any one ticket winning is thus 1 in 1,000, or 0.1%. Before the lottery is drawn, rational participants know these odds and believe with high confidence that their own ticket won't win. This is because the odds of winning are extremely low. Everyone, then, has the belief that their ticket is one of the 999 losers. Here's the paradox. Each ticket holder believes based on the probabilities that their ticket will lose. However, someone's ticket is bound to win. This leads to a contradiction, as all the participants believe their ticket will lose, yet one of them must be the winner. In this scenario, there are two key beliefs that seem to conflict with each other. On one hand, each individual believes with high confidence that their ticket will lose, based on the known probabilities. On the other hand, the collective knowledge of the lottery system tells us that exactly one ticket will win, and therefore one of these 1,000 beliefs must be false. At the heart of the lottery paradox is a tension between what we believe about individual outcomes and what we know collectively about the system. While each person is justified in believing their ticket will lose, based on the probability of winning being so low, this belief becomes problematic when viewed from the perspective of the overall system, where one ticket must win. The paradox exposes a conflict between individual reasoning and the collective outcome. Several resolutions have been proposed to address the paradox, with the most common being to appeal to a distinction between individual justification and collective certainty. Each individual may have a justified belief that their ticket will lose, but this belief does not account for the inevitable fact that one ticket will win. In other words, while each person believes their ticket will lose, this belief is consistent with the larger truth that one ticket will win, even though no individual can identify which one. Another approach to resolving the paradox is to focus on probabilistic reasoning. While the probability of winning is extremely low for each individual, The collective knowledge that one ticket will win does not negate the individual's rational belief that their ticket will not win. The paradox can be understood as a product of the way we reason about probabilities and outcomes, rather than a genuine logical contradiction. The lottery paradox also has implications for how we understand knowledge and certainty in general. It raises important questions about how we justify beliefs, especially in situations involving uncertainty and large numbers. In many real-world scenarios such as scientific research or social predictions, individuals may confidently reject certain possibilities based on probabilities, yet the collective outcome may still defy their predictions. The paradox reminds us that probability is not always sufficient to predict individual outcomes with certainty. In conclusion, the lottery paradox is an intriguing puzzle that forces us to think carefully about how we reason about probabilities, knowledge, and belief. It highlights the tension between individual reasoning and collective certainty, and it challenges our understanding of how we justify beliefs in situations of uncertainty. While the paradox may seem counterintuitive at first, it ultimately reveals important insights about the nature of knowledge and the complexities of probabilistic reasoning. Ship of Theseus. Do you know about the Ship of Theseus paradox? It's one of the most interesting thought experiments in philosophy, and it really makes you think about identity and change. Imagine this. A ship, once belonging to the legendary Greek hero Theseus, sails across the seas. Over time, every single part of the ship is replaced. The wood, the sails, the ropes, one by one they're all swapped out. But here's the big question. Is it still the same ship of Theseus after all these parts have been replaced? Or has it become something else entirely? It's not as simple as it sounds, and this paradox gets to the heart of what makes something the same over time. The paradox starts with this idea of gradual change. Imagine you're watching the ship. Day by day, plank by plank, the parts of the ship are being replaced. First, a broken board gets swapped out, then a torn sail is replaced. Eventually, there's nothing left of the original ship. It's a brand new ship, made of entirely new materials. But here's the kicker. Does that mean it's no longer the ship of Theseus? Or is it still the same even though everything has changed? Now let's take a step back and think about this. Is the ship the same because of the materials it's made from? Or is it the same because it serves the same purpose, looks the same, and carries the same history? This gets to a deeper question about identity. For example, think about yourself. Every 7 to 10 years your body completely replaces its cells. The skin you have now isn't the same skin you had a decade ago, and even your bones are constantly changing. So, are you still you after all this change? Or have you become someone else? Most people would say that you're still you because your memories, experiences, and sense of self stay intact, even though your body is constantly changing. The Ship of Theseus is really asking us to think about this same idea. Maybe identity isn't just about the parts or the materials. Maybe it's more about continuity, the fact that something continues to serve the same role or purpose over time. The ship still looks like a ship, still sails like a ship, and still serves the same function, right? So, maybe it's still the Ship of Theseus, even if all the parts have been replaced. But then we can take it further. What if we replaced the ship's parts one by one, and then once every single part was swapped out, we built a second ship using all of the original pieces? Now, which one is the real Ship of Theseus? The one made of all new parts, or the one made from the original materials? This is where things get tricky. We're not just talking about the ship anymore. We're talking about the idea of identity, and how it's tied to both the parts of something and the history it carries. Now let's think about this from a bigger perspective. It's not just ships that this paradox applies to. It can make us question all sorts of things like how we understand people or even objects that change over time. Take a famous historical building, for example. If all the bricks in the building were replaced with new ones, would it still be the same building? Or what about a painting? If the canvas is replaced or the paint starts to fade and is restored, does it still carry the same identity? The Ship of Theseus paradox is really asking whether identity is based on the materials, or is it about something deeper, like continuity and function? But let's go even deeper. What if, instead of gradually replacing the ship's parts, we took all of the original parts and put them together to create a brand new ship? Which one would you call the real Ship of Theseus? The new one made from the original parts or the one made of entirely new materials? This gets at the heart of the paradox. What's more important for identity, where the parts came from or what the object still represents? The Ship of Theseus really challenges how we think about identity. It's not just about the physical parts. It's about how things change over time and what makes them still the same. The paradox also forces us to think about our own lives. When we change, when we grow, learn, and evolve, do we still remain ourselves? Or have we become something entirely new? It's a question that's much bigger than just a ship. It's about how we understand the world and the things around us. The truth is, the ship of Theseus paradox doesn't have a simple answer. Maybe there's no clear line where the ship stops being the ship of Theseus, or maybe it's always changing just like everything else in life. But by asking these questions, we get to explore deeper ideas about what makes something the same, and how change can affect identity in ways we might not expect. So next time you see something that's been repaired, restored, or changed over time, think about this paradox. Is it still the same as it was before, or has it become something new? And what does that say about how we see ourselves, our memories, and even the world around us? Monty Hall Problem Paradox. The Monty Hall problem is a classic probability puzzle based on a game show scenario. It is named after Monty Hall, the host of the American television game show Let's Make a Deal. The problem presents a situation in which a contestant is given a choice between 3 doors. Behind one of the doors is a car, while behind the other 2 are goats. The contestant initially picks one door, but before it is opened, Monty, who knows what is behind each door, opens one of the other 2 doors, always revealing a goat. Monty then offers the contestant the opportunity to switch their choice to the remaining unopened door. The paradox lies in whether the contestant should stick with their original choice or switch to the other door. Intuitively, it might seem that the odds of winning the car are 50-50 after Monty opens one of the doors, as there are 2 remaining doors. However, probability theory reveals that switching actually gives the contestant a 2/3 chance of winning the car, while sticking with the original choice only gives a 1/3 chance. To understand why this is the case, let's break down the process and the probabilities at each stage. Initially, when the contestant picks one of the 3 doors, the chance of the car being behind the chosen door is 1/3, and the chance of it being behind one of the other 2 doors is 2/3. This is the key insight, as it suggests that it is more likely that the car is behind one of the other 2 doors rather than the one the contestant originally chose. After the initial choice, Monty, who knows what is behind each door, opens one of the other 2 doors, always revealing a goat. This action doesn't change the original probabilities but effectively eliminates one of the losing options. If the contestant initially picked a door with a goat behind it, which has a 2/3 probability of occurring, Monty will open the other door with a goat, leaving the remaining unopened door with the car. If the contestant initially picked the door with the car behind it, a 1/3 chance, Monty will reveal one of the doors with a goat, and switching would result in a loss. This setup means that, by switching, the contestant is effectively betting that their first choice was wrong, which has a 2/3 probability of being true. If they stick with their original choice, they only win if their first pick was correct, which has a 1/3 probability. The paradoxical aspect of the Monty Hall problem arises from our intuitions about probability. Most people believe that the odds are equal after Monty reveals a goat, but the fact that Monty's actions provide additional information fundamentally changes the probabilities. The problem challenges our understanding of conditional probability and the way in which additional information influences outcomes. Several different approaches and simulations can be used to illustrate this concept, but the key takeaway is that the contestant should always switch doors, as it increases their chances of winning the car from 1/3 to February 3rd. One way to think about this is by considering a long series of games. If the contestant always switches, they will win the car approximately 2/3 of the time, while if they always stick with their original choice, they will win only 1/3 of the time. This result is consistent across repeated trials, further emphasizing the counterintuitive nature of the problem. Many variations of the Monty Hall problem have been discussed and studied, with the basic principle remaining the same. The contestant's odds of winning are influenced by the initial probability distribution, and Monty's actions provide critical information that alters those odds. The problem is a fascinating example of how probability theory can defy our natural instincts and how seemingly simple scenarios can lead to surprising results. The Monty Hall paradox has been the subject of extensive discussion in probability theory, psychology, and even philosophy. It highlights the importance of understanding the impact of new information on decision-making processes. For example, it illustrates the concept of information revelation, where the introduction of new data, such as Monty revealing a goat, changes the probability distribution of outcomes. This is a critical concept in many real-world situations where decisions must be made based on uncertain or incomplete information. Psychologists have also used the Monty Hall problem to study human decision-making and intuition. It shows that people often struggle with probabilistic reasoning, especially when faced with scenarios that contradict their expectations. The problem also reveals how our intuitions about randomness and probability can be misleading, leading to suboptimal decisions. This is particularly relevant in fields such as economics, where understanding the way people perceive risk and make decisions is crucial. One important lesson from the Monty Hall problem is the idea of revised probability, or conditional probability. In the original setup, the contestant's initial choice had a 1/3 chance of being correct, but after Monty reveals a goat, the probability distribution is updated. The remaining door has a 2/3 chance of containing the car, reflecting the way in which new information should be incorporated into decision-making processes. The paradox serves as a reminder that probability is not static and that our understanding of the odds can change when we obtain additional information. The Monty Hall problem is also a valuable example in the study of game theory, where strategic decision-making is often based on the available information. In many real-world situations, players must make decisions not only based on their own preferences and strategies but also by considering the potential actions of others. The Monty Hall problem showcases how understanding the behavior of others, in this case Monty, can drastically affect the outcome of a decision. In summary, the Monty Hall problem paradox demonstrates how our intuitions about probability can be misleading and how additional information can dramatically alter the odds of an outcome. The solution to the problem, always switch doors, may seem counterintuitive, but it is grounded in solid probabilistic reasoning. The paradox continues to be an important teaching tool in the fields of probability theory, psychology, and decision-making, highlighting the complexities of human judgment and the importance of considering new information when making decisions. Banach-Tarski Paradox. Imagine taking a ball, cutting it into pieces, and somehow reassembling those pieces into two identical balls, each the same size as the original. This might sound like something straight out of a science fiction story, but it's actually a mathematical concept known as the Banach-Tarski Paradox. At first glance, it seems impossible or even nonsensical, but it's a legitimate result derived from the field of set theory and geometry, particularly in the context of infinite sets. The Banach-Tarski Paradox was first introduced by mathematicians Stefan Banach and Alfred Tarski in 1924. It states that, under certain conditions, it is theoretically possible to take a solid object, like a sphere, break it into a finite number of pieces, and then use those pieces to form two identical copies of the original object. The process seems to violate basic principles of physics, such as the conservation of mass and volume, but the paradox arises from the counterintuitive nature of infinity and mathematical abstraction. To understand this paradox, let's delve deeper into the conditions that make it possible. The pieces involved in the Banach-Tarski paradox aren't the kind of pieces you might think of in the physical world. In fact, the pieces are so strange that they are not even regular shapes in any sense we are familiar with. They are made up of infinitely small points, and they are non-measurable sets. This means that you can't assign a consistent, meaningful volume or size to them in the traditional sense. These pieces are not physical objects in the conventional sense, and their properties are rooted in abstract mathematics. The construction of the paradox relies on the properties of infinite sets, specifically the concept of equidecomposability, where two objects can be split into pieces and rearranged, but not necessarily in a way that is physically intuitive. The pieces in the Banach-Tarski paradox are not ordinary pieces you can hold or observe. Instead, they exist in a mathematical sense, constructed using the axiom of choice, a principle from set theory. The axiom of choice allows us to select elements from an infinite number of sets in a way that defies our physical intuition, enabling the paradox to work. To illustrate this, imagine starting with a ball and breaking it into several parts. In normal circumstances, if you cut a physical object into pieces, those pieces would retain some of the properties of the original object. But in the Banach-Tarski paradox, the pieces are constructed in such a way that, when rearranged, they no longer resemble the original ball. Instead, they form two complete and identical copies of the original ball. The key here is that the pieces are not defined by conventional geometry. They are defined by abstract mathematical rules that do not apply to the physical world. It's important to note that the Banach-Tarski paradox doesn't imply that this can be done in real life. The paradox is a theoretical result that exists within the realm of abstract mathematics. In the real world, objects are made up of atoms, and cutting them into pieces in the way described by the paradox is physically impossible. The paradox doesn't suggest that mass or volume can be created out of nothing. Rather, it highlights the strange and often unintuitive behavior of infinite sets in mathematical theory. The Banach-Tarski paradox has significant implications in the fields of mathematics and philosophy. One of the primary takeaways is that infinity behaves in ways that defy our everyday experiences. Our understanding of space, volume, and measurement is deeply tied to the physical world, but the paradox shows that when we move into the realm of abstract mathematics, our usual rules and intuitions break down. Infinity doesn't follow the same rules as finite numbers, and mathematical objects can behave in ways that seem impossible when we try to apply our physical understanding. This paradox also raises questions about the nature of mathematical reality. It challenges the concept of realism in mathematics, which holds that mathematical objects and structures have an existence independent of human thought. The Banach-Tarski Paradox suggests that mathematical reality can sometimes lead to outcomes that seem disconnected from the physical world. Some mathematicians and philosophers see this as evidence that mathematics is a human invention, not a discovery of an objective reality. Furthermore, the Banach-Tarski Paradox is a great example of how the axiom of choice can lead to counterintuitive results. The axiom of choice is a principle in set theory that allows for the selection of elements from an infinite number of sets. While the axiom is extremely useful in many areas of mathematics, it also has some peculiar consequences, as evidenced by the Banach-Tarski Paradox. In this case, the axiom enables the construction of non-measurable sets and the ability to split an object into parts that don't behave in ways we expect, based on our usual understanding of space and volume. Another fascinating aspect of the Banach-Tarski Paradox is its connection to the concept of symmetry in mathematics. The paradox demonstrates how objects can be decomposed and recombined in ways that preserve their symmetry, even if the process seems nonsensical. The idea that you can break a sphere into pieces and rearrange them to form two identical spheres illustrates the abstract beauty and symmetry that can exist in mathematics, even though it contradicts everything we know about physical objects. Despite its mind-boggling implications, the Banach-Tarski Paradox isn't something that has practical consequences in our everyday lives. It doesn't mean that you can split an apple into two apples or that you can create extra mass by rearranging pieces of an object. The paradox remains a theoretical result that exists in the realm of mathematical abstraction. It's a reminder of how our intuitions can be challenged when we venture into the world of infinity, set theory, and abstract mathematical logic. In conclusion, the Banach-Tarski Paradox is a powerful example of the strange, often bewildering results that can arise in the world of mathematics. It challenges our understanding of space, volume, and measurement, showing that these concepts behave very differently when applied to infinite sets. While the paradox may seem like a violation of basic physical laws, it is a theoretical construct that reveals the power of mathematical abstraction. The paradox serves as a reminder that infinity doesn't conform to the rules we apply to the finite world, and it opens up fascinating questions about the nature of mathematics, reality, and the limits of human intuition. Paradox of the Raven. Have you ever heard of the paradox of the raven? It's one of the most thought-provoking paradoxes in philosophy and logic, questioning how we determine truth through observation. At first, it might seem like an abstract puzzle, but when you dive deeper, you realize it challenges the very way we think about evidence, logic, and scientific reasoning. Let's start with a simple idea. Suppose a scientist wants to test the statement, "All ravens are black." This is a basic generalization, something we accept as true because we've observed many black ravens in nature. But how do we actually prove this statement? According to logical reasoning, one way to confirm a general statement is to observe specific examples that match it. So, every time we see a black raven, it supports the claim that all ravens are black. That seems straightforward. But here's where the paradox begins. A principle in logic called the equivalence condition states that if two statements are logically equivalent, then any evidence supporting one should also support the other. The statement "all ravens are black" is logically equivalent to "all non-black things are not ravens." That means if we want to prove that all ravens are black, we should also be able to do so by observing things that are not ravens and are not black, such as a red apple, a blue car, or a white piece of paper. So, according to this logic, every time you see a green leaf or a yellow banana, you are technically confirming that all ravens are black. This conclusion feels absurd. How could seeing a red apple possibly tell us anything about the color of ravens? And yet, based purely on logical principles, this reasoning should hold. This contradiction is what makes it a paradox. It forces us to question whether our usual ways of thinking about evidence and confirmation actually make sense. Breaking down the paradox. To understand why this paradox is so strange, let's look at its structure. The original claim, "All ravens are black." The logically equivalent claim, "All non-black things are not ravens." Observing black ravens supports the claim that all ravens are black. Observing non-black things that are not ravens, like a blue sky or a red apple, should also support the claim. But something feels off. We intuitively believe that looking at more ravens should confirm the statement, while looking at apples should not matter at all. And yet, logic tells us otherwise. Why does this paradox matter? At its core, the paradox of the raven challenges our understanding of inductive reasoning, the process of drawing general conclusions based on specific observations. It raises an important question: what counts as valid evidence? For example, in science, we often confirm theories by collecting supporting observations. If a medical study claims that a drug is effective, we believe this because we see positive results in tested patients. But does this mean we should also confirm the drug's effectiveness by studying people who never took it? The paradox suggests that, logically, we should, but this doesn't align with how we normally think about scientific evidence. Attempts to resolve the paradox. Many philosophers and scientists have tried to explain or resolve this paradox. Here are some of the most well-known responses. 1. The relevance argument. Some argue that while non-black non-ravens technically provide support for the hypothesis, the amount of confirmation they give is so small that it is practically meaningless. Seeing a single black raven is far more informative than seeing a red apple, even if both technically confirm the statement. 2. Bayesian probability theory. Another approach comes from Bayesian probability, which focuses on how much a piece of evidence changes our prior beliefs. Seeing a black raven greatly increases our confidence in the claim, while seeing a red apple does almost nothing to change our beliefs. This explains why the paradox feels wrong. It's not that apples don't confirm the statement, it's just that their confirmation is so tiny that it's irrelevant. 3. The problem with general statements. Some philosophers believe the paradox happens because of the way we phrase general statements like, all ravens are black. They argue that such universal statements are too broad, leading to logical issues when applying evidence. Instead, we should focus on statistical probabilities rather than absolute claims. The paradox in everyday life. This paradox isn't just an abstract puzzle. It reflects real issues in how we think about evidence and knowledge. Consider these situations. In court cases, should evidence supporting someone's innocence be given the same weight as evidence proving their guilt? In science, how do we determine what observations truly confirm a theory? In everyday reasoning, when do we accept something as proven based on what we see? The paradox of the raven reminds us that logic and intuition don't always align, and that understanding knowledge isn't as simple as just seeing more evidence. It's a fascinating problem that continues to challenge our understanding of reasoning, science, and truth. So next time you see a red apple, think about this. Did you just confirm that all ravens are black? Russell's Paradox. What if logic itself could lead to contradictions? What if a seemingly straightforward question unraveled the very foundations of mathematics and set the stage for a crisis in set theory? This is the heart of Russell's Paradox, a contradiction discovered by the philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell in the early 20th century. It arises when we consider the concept of sets, particularly the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. To illustrate, imagine a library that contains a catalog listing all books that do not reference themselves. Now, should this catalog itself be listed in the catalog? If it is included, then it contradicts its own rule by referencing itself. But if it is excluded, then it qualifies to be in the catalog, leading to an inescapable loop. Mathematically, the paradox is framed as follows. Let S be the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Does S contain itself? If it does, it contradicts its definition. If it doesn't, then by definition, it should contain itself. This paradox revealed a fundamental inconsistency in naive set theory, shaking the very core of mathematics. The implications of Russell's paradox were profound. It showed that unrestricted set formation could lead to logical contradictions. In response, mathematicians like Ernst Zermelo and Abraham Frankel developed axiomatic set theory, introducing rules that prevent such paradoxes. One such rule is the Zermelo-Frankel set theory with the axiom of choice, ZFC, which forms the foundation of modern mathematics. But why does this matter beyond mathematics? At its core, Russell's paradox highlights a flaw in how we define collections, categories, and even language itself. Consider self-referential statements like the liar paradox. This statement is false. If it's true, then it must be false. If false, then it must be true. Both the liar paradox and Russell's paradox expose the limits of formal logic and the necessity of rigorous structures in reasoning. Philosophically, the paradox also plays a role in the study of truth and self-reference. If categories can contradict themselves, can absolute truths exist? This question has implications for epistemology, where scholars debate whether knowledge and logic are inherently limited by the structures we use to define them. Even in computer science, Russell's paradox finds relevance. Programming languages and databases rely on set theory to organize data. If unrestricted self-referential loops exist, they can lead to infinite regressions and crashes. This is why modern programming paradigms implement safeguards to avoid such logical traps. Further complicating matters, Gödel's incompleteness theorems built upon ideas similar to Russell's paradox to show that any sufficiently powerful mathematical system will contain true statements that cannot be proven within the system. This shattered the dream of a complete, self-contained foundation for mathematics, reinforcing the idea that logical paradoxes are not just isolated curiosities, but fundamental limitations. Additionally, Russell's paradox influenced later developments in logic, leading to type theory, where objects are categorized into hierarchical types to avoid contradictions. Russell himself developed the theory of types to address the paradox, proposing a structured way to separate different levels of sets and prevent self-referential contradictions. But this raises yet another question. If paradoxes arise from self-reference, are there any paradox-free systems? Mathematicians continue to explore alternative logical frameworks, such as category theory, to build more consistent foundations. Yet, these frameworks also come with trade-offs, highlighting the tension between completeness and consistency in logic. Beyond academic fields, Russell's paradox has even made its way into pop culture and everyday reasoning. The idea of self-referential loops is seen in paradoxical statements, recursive storytelling, and even bureaucracy, where systems attempt to regulate themselves but fall into contradictions. Ultimately, Russell's paradox forces us to confront the very limits of human reasoning. If our logical systems contain contradictions at their core, how much can we truly rely on them? Does this mean we must always live with some degree of uncertainty, even in disciplines we consider exact? So what do you think? Does this paradox reveal a fundamental flaw in our reasoning, or does it simply push us toward more refined systems of logic? If a set cannot define itself without contradiction, can we ever fully trust the structures upon which our logic is built? Perhaps the most important lesson from Russell's paradox is not in solving it, but in recognizing the fragile nature of logic itself. As we continue to push the boundaries of mathematics, philosophy, and computing, we must always remain aware of the paradoxes lurking within our own assumptions. Omnipotence Paradox. Imagine you're sitting in a quiet room, pondering the nature of ultimate power, omnipotence. What does it mean to be all-powerful? Can there be a limit to omnipotence? Now, picture yourself contemplating this paradox. If God is all-powerful, could he create a rock so heavy that even he couldn't lift it? Seems straightforward, right? But this question dives deep into some complex issues about the nature of power, logic, and the very limits of what it means to be all-powerful. The Omnipotence Paradox asks, if God is truly omnipotent, does that mean he can do anything, even things that seem logically contradictory, like creating a rock he can't lift? The paradox hinges on the idea that omnipotence means the ability to do absolutely anything, including the logically impossible. If you think about it, the concept of omnipotence is one that is often taken to mean limitless power, power without any restrictions, including those imposed by logic. But when you bring in the question of the rock, you bump into a strange situation where doing something logically incoherent, like creating a paradox, seems to challenge the very nature of omnipotence. So what's the problem here? On one side, if God is omnipotent and can do anything, he should be able to create a rock so heavy that even he can't lift it, right? But then, if he can't lift the rock, doesn't that mean he's not omnipotent? Yet, if he can lift it, then he hasn't created a rock that he cannot lift, meaning he hasn't done everything he could do. This presents an apparent contradiction. Now, think about it from another angle. Maybe omnipotence doesn't necessarily mean the ability to do everything, including the logically impossible. For instance, some philosophers argue that omnipotence is not about doing what's logically incoherent, because logical consistency is seen as an inherent part of what makes someone all-powerful. In other words, omnipotence could be understood as the power to do anything that is possible, but logical contradictions are not things at all. They are meaningless or nonsensical, so they fall outside the scope of even omnipotence. This idea is often referred to as the limitation of omnipotence. The argument goes that omnipotence is about having the power to do all things that are logically possible, but things like creating a rock so heavy that God cannot lift it aren't things that can be done because they are logically incoherent. These kinds of contradictions don't really exist in the realm of possibilities. In essence, being omnipotent doesn't mean being able to do the logically impossible. It means having the power to do anything that is logically possible. On the flip side, there's the perspective that omnipotence isn't bound by human understanding of logic at all. Some argue that God, as the omnipotent being, transcends our logical categories entirely. If you think about it in a more philosophical sense, This view implies that omnipotence is a power that can operate in ways that we, as human beings, cannot fully comprehend. In this view, God's omnipotence may not be constrained by our concepts of logical possibility or impossibility. What might seem like a contradiction to us could be nothing more than a limitation of our understanding. But then, even with this view, there's still a lingering question. How do we reconcile omnipotence with logical consistency? Could God's power extend so far that he could transcend even logical contradictions? Some have tried to address this by saying that omnipotence isn't about transcending logic, but rather the ability to do things that make sense in a different, higher logic that we, as humans, just can't grasp. Let's pause here and think about how we understand power in the first place. Power, for most of us, is about ability, the capacity to do things, to make things happen. But omnipotence, when applied to a being like God, doesn't seem to fit neatly into the same framework. The very nature of omnipotence involves the ability to do anything, but how can you define anything when the concept itself starts to challenge the limits of our own logic? This is where the paradox becomes really engaging. It's not just about an abstract idea of power, but about what we believe is possible and what lies beyond our grasp. Now let's tie it into real-world implications. The Omnipotence Paradox isn't just a theoretical question that philosophers throw around. It reflects deeper questions about how we understand the nature of divine power, the nature of our own beliefs about possibility, and the limits of human understanding. If we think about God as the all-powerful creator, there's an implicit expectation that his power is limitless. But when faced with logical contradictions, does that power extend to breaking the laws of logic themselves? The Omnipotence Paradox forces us to question the nature of ultimate power and whether or not there are inherent limits, even in the case of a being described as omnipotent. One of the most fascinating things about this paradox is that it makes us confront the limits of language itself. The way we talk about omnipotence and the very question of whether God can or cannot do something logically contradictory forces us to wrestle with the concept of language, logic, and meaning. What does it even mean to do something that is logically incoherent? Can we even make sense of such an idea in the context of a being with limitless power? And if not, does that imply that omnipotence must always be bounded by logical coherence? Or is omnipotence so radical that it transcends these limits entirely? The Omnipotence Paradox doesn't just stay in the realm of philosophy, it gets at the core of our understanding of reality itself. It challenges our assumptions about what it means to be all-powerful, and in doing so, it opens up new ways of thinking about the nature of power, logic, and existence. It might not have a definitive solution, but that's part of what makes it so intriguing. It's a paradox that invites ongoing exploration, with no easy answers but plenty of fascinating implications for how we understand the divine, the impossible, and the limits of our own knowledge. So, the next time you encounter the Omnipotence Paradox, take a moment to really think about the layers involved. It's more than just a question about a rock. It's a question about the very nature of power, knowledge, and the limits of what can be known or even imagined. Is omnipotence truly limitless? Or is the paradox itself a clue that ultimate power, even when it exists in its most supreme form, might be subject to its own set of rules that we, as humans, are still struggling to understand? Abilene Paradox. The Abilene Paradox is a fascinating and often unsettling phenomenon that sheds light on the complexities of group decision-making. It highlights how a group of people, despite having individual desires and preferences that differ from one another, can collectively make a decision that none of them actually want. This paradox shows how a misunderstanding of others' true thoughts and a fear of conflict can lead to a decision that nobody supports but that everyone participates in, often to their detriment. The term itself was coined by management expert Jerry B. Harvey in 1974, after he observed a situation in which a group of people acted against their better judgment because they misinterpreted the desires of others. Imagine you're in a group of friends or colleagues, and you're spending time together, perhaps on a vacation or at a social gathering. The group decides to go on a long drive to Abilene, a place far from where you are. However, as the journey progresses, you start to feel uncomfortable because deep down you don't really want to go. Still, everyone else seems to be fine with the idea, and you don't want to be the one to break the group's consensus. As you drive on, you start to wonder if anyone else is feeling the same way, but no one says anything. The drive to Abilene continues, and when you finally arrive, it becomes clear that no one in the group actually wanted to go there in the first place. Each person had assumed that everyone else was excited about the idea, so no one spoke up to voice their true feelings. This situation encapsulates the Abilene Paradox perfectly. It's a group dynamic where the decision made by the collective is irrational or contrary to the true preferences of the individuals involved, but it happens because each person falsely believes that others are on board with the decision. The paradox illustrates how people, out of a desire to conform, avoid conflict, or maintain harmony, will often suppress their true feelings and go along with a decision they actually disagree with. It shows how individuals in a group often make decisions they wouldn't have made on their own, and this leads to outcomes that are suboptimal or even undesirable for everyone. At its core, the Abilene Paradox is driven by the desire to avoid disagreement. People in a group may fear that voicing their true opinions could disrupt the group's cohesion or cause tension. This fear can lead them to follow along with decisions they don't actually want, simply because they assume that everyone else wants the same thing. This creates a vicious cycle. Everyone assumes that everyone else is in favor of the decision, so no one speaks up, and the group ends up making a choice that no one really wants. This paradox can occur in all kinds of settings, from social gatherings to business meetings, and it often leads to a sense of frustration and resentment within the group. The group's decision-making process becomes distorted because of a lack of honest communication and a failure to accurately assess the true desires of the group members. What's especially insidious about the Abilene Paradox is that it often occurs in situations where the cost of speaking up is perceived to be high, whether it's the fear of conflict, the desire to be liked, or the need to fit in. This reluctance to express dissenting opinions leads to poor decision-making, as people go along with something that doesn't align with their true preferences. A classic example of the Abilene Paradox can be found in the workplace. Imagine a team of employees working together on a project, and the team leader suggests a particular strategy or approach. Perhaps the strategy isn't ideal, but each team member assumes that others believe it's the best option. No one speaks up to suggest an alternative, because they don't want to seem like they're questioning the leader's authority or creating friction within the team. As a result, the group moves forward with the strategy, even though none of the team members feel confident about it. This results in wasted time, energy, and resources, all because of the Abilene Paradox. The collective choice is based on a false assumption that everyone else supports the decision. The Abilene Paradox also highlights how miscommunication can play a significant role in group dynamics. In many cases, people within the group may not openly express their thoughts, but they still make assumptions about what others want. These assumptions are often wrong, leading to decisions that aren't in line with anyone's preferences. Furthermore, the more members in a group, the more likely it is that the Abilene Paradox will occur. With larger groups, the complexity of communication increases, and the likelihood of misinterpretation grows. As each person tries to avoid conflict and align with the perceived desires of others, the group ends up with a decision that is dissatisfactory to everyone involved. The Abilene Paradox also ties into the broader concept of groupthink, a phenomenon where the desire for consensus and harmony in a group leads to poor decision-making. Groupthink can occur when individuals suppress dissenting opinions in order to maintain group cohesion, which can lead to suboptimal outcomes. However, unlike groupthink, which is often driven by a desire to avoid criticism or to be in agreement with an authority figure, the Abilene Paradox is driven more by the fear of social disapproval or disrupting the group dynamic. In both cases, the group makes a decision that no one is truly happy with, but the reasons behind the decision are slightly different. To resolve the Abilene Paradox, open communication and honest feedback are key. Encouraging group members to express their true opinions and preferences without fear of conflict can help prevent the situation from arising. Leaders can play a crucial role in breaking the cycle of the Abilene Paradox by fostering an environment where dissent is welcomed and where everyone feels comfortable sharing their thoughts. This openness allows the group to make decisions that genuinely reflect the preferences of all its members, leading to more informed, productive, and satisfying outcomes. Another way to prevent the Abilene Paradox is through careful decision-making processes that involve all stakeholders and consider multiple perspectives. By actively seeking input from everyone involved and ensuring that each person's voice is heard, groups can make more rational decisions that are in line with their collective interests. In some cases, it may even be helpful to appoint someone to play the role of devil's advocate, a person whose job it is to question assumptions and challenge group consensus. This can help break the group out of its conformist tendencies and encourage more critical thinking. The Abilene Paradox is a powerful reminder of the importance of honest communication, self-awareness, and critical thinking in group settings. It teaches us that, as individuals, we have a responsibility to speak up when something doesn't align with our preferences, even if it means disagreeing with the group. By doing so, we can avoid the trap of collectively making decisions that nobody really wants. Ultimately, the key to overcoming the Abilene Paradox lies in understanding that groups are made up of individuals, and the best decisions are those that are made with everyone's true thoughts and desires taken into account. Only by breaking the silence and embracing open, honest dialogue can groups make decisions that are truly in their best interest. Twin Paradox. Have you ever thought about what would happen if you traveled through space at almost the speed of light? Would time slow down for you? Would you return to Earth and find that everyone else had aged while you barely changed? This is exactly what the Twin Paradox is about, and it's one of the strangest ideas in physics. It challenges everything we think we know about time. Imagine two twins, Alice and Bob. Alice stays on Earth, living a normal life. But Bob jumps into a spaceship and blasts off into space at an insanely high speed, close to the speed of light. After years of traveling, he turns around and heads back to Earth. But when he finally meets Alice again, something bizarre has happened. Alice is now much older than him. Bob has barely aged in comparison. How is this possible? This happens because of a strange effect called time dilation, which comes from Einstein's theory of relativity. The rule is simple. The faster you move, the slower time passes for you compared to someone who isn't moving as fast. Since Bob was zooming through space at nearly the speed of light, time slowed down for him. While Alice experienced, say, 50 years on Earth, Bob may have only aged 10 years in his spaceship. That's why when he returns, Alice is much older while Bob still looks young. Now here's where it gets really weird. If motion is relative, then from Bob's perspective, Alice was the one moving away at high speed. Shouldn't Bob also think that Alice's time is running slower? Why does Bob end up younger and not Alice? This is the paradox. Two people see time differently, but only one actually experiences less aging. The answer lies in the fact that Bob did something Alice didn't. He turned around. When Bob changed direction to come back, he accelerated and switched frames of reference. That change is what breaks the symmetry and makes Bob the one who experiences slowed time. This isn't just a wild theory, it has been proven in real life. Scientists have flown precise atomic clocks on planes and compared them to clocks on the ground. The ones in the planes ticked slightly slower, exactly as Einstein predicted. GPS satellites experience the same effect. They move so fast that their clocks have to be adjusted to stay in sync with Earth's time. Even high-speed particles in laboratories last longer than they should because their time runs slower due to their speed. The twin paradox is often used in science fiction. In Interstellar, astronauts visit a planet near a black hole, and because of time dilation, a few hours for them equals decades back on their spaceship. In Planet of the Apes, an astronaut travels through space at near-light speeds and returns to Earth to find that thousands of years have passed. These stories are based on real physics. If we ever build spaceships that can travel at extreme speeds, astronauts could return from long space journeys to find that Earth has aged centuries, while they have only aged a few years. Right now, we're far from reaching speeds close to light. But if humanity ever does, the twin paradox won't just be an idea, it will be a reality. Imagine leaving on a spaceship for a short trip and coming back to a world that has completely changed. The paradox is not really a contradiction. It's a glimpse into how time actually works, and it tells us that time is not fixed. It's flexible, it changes depending on how fast you move, and it's far stranger than we ever imagined. Black hole paradox. The black hole paradox is one of the most mind-bending concepts in modern physics. A puzzle that draws together gravity, quantum mechanics, and the very nature of the universe. Imagine this. A region in space where gravity is so intense that not even light can escape, where the laws of physics as we know them break down. This is a black hole, a cosmic object with the ability to warp the fabric of spacetime itself, bending it into a singularity at its core, an infinitely dense point. But as much as scientists have explored black holes, there's still a deep mystery surrounding them, and that mystery is encapsulated in the paradox. What happens to information that falls into a black hole? To understand the black hole paradox, let's first start with the basics. Black holes are regions of space where gravity is so intense that everything within a certain radius, known as the event horizon, is trapped. Anything that crosses this boundary, including light, cannot escape. At the very center of a black hole, scientists believe lies a singularity, a point where the gravitational pull becomes infinitely strong, and spacetime becomes infinitely warped. According to the theory of general relativity, all the mass and energy that falls into a black hole gets compressed into this singularity. But, as we dig deeper into the physics of black holes, we encounter a major issue that confounds even the brightest minds in science. What happens to the information about the matter and energy that falls into a black hole? The concept of information is crucial in quantum mechanics, where information about the state of a system is thought to be preserved, even when the system itself undergoes changes. In simple terms, the information about the particles, energy, and matter that enter a black hole should, theoretically, still be somewhere, perhaps encoded in some form in the black hole itself. But as it stands, the black hole seems to violate a fundamental principle of quantum mechanics: the conservation of information. The paradox arises when you consider that, according to general relativity, once something crosses the event horizon, it's lost forever. There is no way to retrieve it. But if information is truly lost, then this would contradict one of the most important ideas in quantum mechanics: the idea that information cannot be destroyed. The laws of quantum mechanics are deterministic, meaning that all information about a system state is preserved over time, even if the system changes. In the early days of black hole research, many physicists believed that the information that fell into a black hole was indeed lost forever. This idea was largely based on the notion that once matter and energy entered a black hole, it was trapped beyond the event horizon, and there was no way to retrieve or learn anything about it. However, this idea posed a serious problem. It would mean that information could be destroyed, violating the principles of quantum mechanics. This contradiction between general relativity and quantum mechanics became known as the black hole information paradox, and it posed a major challenge for physicists trying to reconcile the two theories. One of the leading theories that arose to address this paradox was the concept of black hole evaporation, introduced by the physicist Stephen Hawking in the 1970s. Hawking proposed that black holes aren't entirely black. They emit radiation due to quantum mechanical effects near the event horizon. This radiation, known as Hawking radiation, is caused by the creation of particle-antiparticle pairs that spontaneously appear near the event horizon. One particle falls into the black hole, while the other escapes, carrying away energy. Over time, this radiation causes the black hole to lose mass and eventually evaporate, shrinking away to nothing. If the black hole evaporates completely, this leads to an even bigger problem. What happens to the information that fell into the black hole? If the black hole disappears and the information inside it is lost forever, this would be a major violation of the principle of information conservation in quantum mechanics. The question of whether information is truly lost in a black hole has sparked heated debates among physicists, and there are several proposed solutions to the paradox. One of the most well-known ideas is the holographic principle, which suggests that all the information about what falls into a black hole is encoded on its surface, specifically at the event horizon. According to this theory, the information is not lost, but rather it is stored on the black hole's boundary, much like a hologram contains all the information about a three-dimensional object in two dimensions. This would mean that, while the matter inside a black hole is effectively hidden from view, the information about it is still preserved on the event horizon in a kind of holographic form. Another possible resolution to the paradox is the idea that information could be emitted as part of the Hawking radiation itself. In this scenario, as a black hole evaporates, the information about what fell into it would gradually leak out, encoded in the radiation. This would preserve the information and prevent the destruction of data, in line with the principles of quantum mechanics. However, this theory has faced challenges, as it's difficult to reconcile how exactly the information would be encoded in the radiation in a way that wouldn't violate the laws of quantum mechanics or lead to inconsistencies in the theory. There is also a more radical theory known as the firewall hypothesis, which suggests that the event horizon of a black hole might not be a smooth, continuous boundary. Instead, it could be a zone of intense radiation, something like a firewall, that destroys anything that crosses it, including information. According to this idea, the firewall would prevent the information from being preserved in the black hole. While this idea has gained some attention in recent years, it is still a highly controversial and debated solution, and it raises more questions about the nature of black holes and their event horizons. One of the most fascinating aspects of the black hole paradox is how it connects to the very fabric of the universe and the nature of reality itself. At the heart of the paradox lies a deep mystery about the laws of physics, the fundamental nature of information, and how we understand the universe. It forces physicists to question whether our current theories of general relativity and quantum mechanics are fundamentally incompatible, or whether there is a deeper theory that unites the two. The paradox is also a reminder of how much we still have to learn about the universe. Despite all the advances in our understanding of black holes, including the recent breakthrough of capturing the first-ever image of a black hole's event horizon, we are still far from understanding the full nature of these cosmic objects. The black hole paradox challenges us to confront the limits of our knowledge and to search for new ways to understand the fundamental laws of the universe. In the end, the black hole paradox is more than just a technical challenge for physicists. It's a window into the deepest mysteries of existence. It's a paradox that forces us to reconsider what we know about space, time, and information, and it invites us to imagine a reality where the rules of physics break down in the most unexpected ways. The ultimate resolution to the paradox may one day change the way we think about the universe, or it may reveal new, unimaginable aspects of reality. Until then, the paradox remains a captivating puzzle that continues to inspire scientists and thinkers to push the boundaries of our understanding, seeking the answers to questions that, for now, remain beyond our reach. Newcomb's Paradox. Newcomb's Paradox is a thought experiment in decision theory that presents an intriguing conflict between two seemingly rational choices. The paradox revolves around a situation involving two boxes, one transparent and the other opaque. The transparent box contains a visible sum of money, say $1,000, while the opaque box either contains $1 million or nothing at all. The challenge comes from the fact that a highly accurate predictor, often referred to as the predictor, has already made a prediction about what you will do and placed money into the boxes accordingly. The rules of the paradox are simple yet paradoxical. You, the player, must choose between two options: take both boxes or take only the opaque box. If you choose both boxes, you will receive whatever is in the transparent box, which is $1,000, plus whatever is in the opaque box, which could either be $1 million or nothing. If the predictor predicted that you would choose both boxes, they have left the opaque box empty. If the predictor predicted you would only choose the opaque box, they have placed $1 million inside it. Your decision is a gamble, whether to trust the predictor's prediction and choose just the opaque box, or to take both boxes, ensuring you get $1,000 plus whatever the opaque box contains. The crux of the paradox lies in the apparent contradiction between two decision-making strategies that seem rational, but lead to different outcomes. One strategy is based on expected utility theory, while the other stems from the idea of maximizing immediate gain. According to expected utility theory, you should choose only the opaque box, trusting that the predictor has correctly anticipated your decision and placed $1 million inside. This strategy appears to maximize your potential gain, even though it requires trusting the predictor's prediction. On the other hand, the second strategy follows a more traditional, intuitive approach based on maximizing immediate benefit. Take both boxes. This approach seems rational because you are guaranteed to get $1,000 from the transparent box, and there is a 50% chance of getting the $1 million from the opaque box, regardless of the predictor's prediction. In this sense, the second strategy is based on the principle of dominance. Since choosing both boxes seems to offer a better payoff in the worst-case scenario, it appears to be the optimal decision. The paradox arises because both strategies are grounded in sound reasoning but yield contradictory results. The expected utility theory suggests that the optimal decision is to trust the predictor and choose only the opaque box, while the dominance principle suggests that taking both boxes guarantees a better outcome. This conflict between the two strategies leads to the paradox, as both seem to provide logical justifications for their respective choices. Philosophers, economists, and game theorists have long debated the implications of Newcomb's paradox, attempting to reconcile the tension between the two strategies. Some argue that the paradox highlights the limitations of classical decision theory, pointing to the difficulty of incorporating prediction into decision-making models. Others view the paradox as an illustration of the complexities inherent in making decisions under uncertainty, particularly when the actions of others are involved. One possible solution to the paradox lies in the concept of evidential decision theory, which suggests that you should act based on what your decision reveals about the likely outcome. In this case, choosing the opaque box reflects the belief that the predictor has correctly anticipated your decision, which, according to evidential decision theory, should lead to the best outcome. This approach differs from traditional decision-making models, which focus solely on maximizing personal gain. However, there are several counterarguments to this solution. Critics of evidential decision theory argue that it places too much emphasis on the predictor's abilities, which may not be reliable in all scenarios. If the predictor is not infallible or if their predictions are based on incomplete information, then relying on their prediction could lead to suboptimal outcomes. Furthermore, some argue that the predictor's past accuracy does not necessarily guarantee future success, making it unreasonable to base your decision solely on their predictions. Despite these criticisms, evidential decision theory has gained traction as a potential solution to the paradox, as it provides a way of reconciling the tension between the two strategies. By emphasizing the importance of considering the predictor's prediction as part of the decision-making process, this theory offers a more nuanced approach to the paradox that accounts for the complexity of human decision-making. Another possible solution to Newcomb's paradox is to adopt a more pragmatic, context-dependent approach to decision-making. This solution suggests that the optimal choice depends on the specific circumstances and the individual's preferences. For example, if the individual values the potential for a large payoff more than the certainty of a smaller reward, they may be more inclined to trust the predictor and choose only the opaque box. Conversely, if the individual prefers a guaranteed smaller reward over the possibility of a larger, uncertain one, they may choose to take both boxes. In this way, the paradox is resolved by recognizing that different people may have different risk preferences, and their decisions will vary accordingly. One of the key lessons of Newcomb's paradox is that decision-making is not always as straightforward as it may seem. The paradox challenges the assumption that rational choices always lead to optimal outcomes and highlights the importance of considering the broader context in which decisions are made. By introducing the concept of prediction into the decision-making process, the paradox forces us to reconsider the nature of rationality and the role that external factors, such as the abilities of others, play in shaping our choices. The paradox also raises important questions about the nature of free will and determinism. If the predictor is capable of accurately predicting your decision, does this imply that your actions are determined in advance? Does the ability of the predictor to foresee your choices undermine the concept of free will? These questions have been the subject of much philosophical inquiry, as they touch on fundamental issues about the nature of human agency and the extent to which our decisions are shaped by factors beyond our control. Moreover, Newcomb's paradox challenges our understanding of how information and predictions influence decision-making. It suggests that our choices may be influenced not just by immediate rewards but by our expectations about how others will behave, even if we have no direct control over those actions. This insight has profound implications for fields such as game theory, economics, and psychology, where the interactions between individuals and the predictions they make about each other's behavior play a central role in shaping outcomes. At its core, Newcomb's paradox is a powerful tool for exploring the complexities of decision-making under uncertainty. It forces us to confront the limits of our traditional decision-making models and challenges us to think more deeply about how we approach choices that involve predictions, risks, and external influences. Whether we ultimately choose to trust the predictor or take both boxes, the paradox underscores the importance of considering the broader context in which decisions are made and the complex factors that shape our choices. As such, Newcomb's paradox continues to be a rich source of debate and discussion among philosophers, economists, and decision theorists. Its central question, whether to trust the predictor or act in a way that maximizes immediate gain, remains a powerful example of the complexities and contradictions that can arise when we attempt to make rational decisions in an uncertain world. The paradox of inquiry. The paradox of inquiry, also known as Zeno's paradox, is a philosophical problem that arises when considering how knowledge is acquired and the nature of inquiry itself. The paradox was first introduced by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato in his dialogue Meno. In this dialogue, Socrates presents the paradox to illustrate a challenge in the search for knowledge and understanding. The paradox can be summarized as follows. If you already know something, then you have no need to inquire about it because you already possess the knowledge. However, if you don't know something, then you don't even know what to look for or where to begin your inquiry because without knowing what it is you seek, you cannot search for it. This creates a circular problem. You cannot search for something you don't know, but if you already know it, there is no need to search at all. So, the paradox raises a fundamental question about how we can ever begin to inquire about anything if we don't already know what it is. To illustrate this, imagine trying to learn something entirely new. If you have no knowledge of the topic at hand, how can you even begin your inquiry? You have no concept of what you are looking for. On the other hand, if you already know the answer or the thing you are inquiring about, there is no need to ask the question in the first place. This paradox highlights the apparent impossibility of beginning the process of inquiry in the first place. Socrates in Meno offers a solution to this paradox. He suggests that inquiry is possible because knowledge is not entirely new. Instead, it is a process of recollection. Socrates argues that the soul is immortal and has experienced all things before, and thus, learning is merely the process of recalling knowledge that is already embedded within us. This idea, known as anamnesis, recollection, proposes that when we inquire about something, we are not discovering entirely new knowledge but remembering things that our soul has known in previous lifetimes. This concept allows for the possibility of inquiry because it suggests that we do not start from absolute ignorance. Instead, we draw upon knowledge that is already within us, though it may be dormant. The paradox of inquiry, however, can be approached from a different angle in modern epistemology. Rather than relying on the idea of recollection, some philosophers suggest that inquiry involves a process of hypothesis formation and testing. In this approach, we don't necessarily need to know the answer in advance, but we can begin by formulating ideas, testing them and refining our understanding. This suggests that even if we don't know exactly what we're looking for, we can begin the process of inquiry by starting with questions and exploring possibilities. The act of asking questions and seeking answers becomes a dynamic and iterative process, with knowledge accumulating over time. Another important insight provided by the paradox of inquiry is the distinction between factual and procedural knowledge. Factual knowledge refers to specific pieces of information, what we know about particular objects or events. Procedural knowledge, on the other hand, refers to how we go about acquiring knowledge or how to engage in an inquiry process. The paradox illustrates that we may not always start with clear, factual knowledge, but we can engage in the process of inquiry through procedural knowledge, knowing how to ask questions, form hypotheses, and explore the world. In modern terms, the paradox is closely related to the problem of epistemic justification. Epistemic justification refers to the reasons we have for believing something to be true. If we don't have any justification for our beliefs, how can we inquire into the truth of something? According to some philosophers, justification is necessary for inquiry, but we often begin with only partial or incomplete knowledge. In this view, inquiry is not about starting from absolute ignorance but rather moving from uncertain or fragmented knowledge to more complete and justified beliefs. We may not have all the answers from the start, but we can begin to ask the right questions and seek out information that leads us toward the truth. The paradox is also relevant to the process of scientific inquiry. Scientists do not begin with all the answers. They start with questions and hypotheses, and through experimentation, observation, and analysis, they gradually build knowledge. Scientific progress is often incremental, with each answer leading to new questions. The paradox of inquiry reflects the iterative nature of scientific discovery, where knowledge is gained not by possessing all the facts from the outset, but by a continual process of questioning, testing, and refining understanding. In conclusion, the paradox of inquiry raises fundamental questions about how we acquire knowledge. It challenges the assumption that knowledge must be fully possessed in order to engage in inquiry. Through the ideas of recollection, hypothesis testing, and epistemic justification, we can navigate this paradox and begin our search for knowledge even when we don't have all the answers. Whether through philosophical reflection or scientific investigation, inquiry is a process that allows us to move from ignorance to understanding, not through an instant revelation of knowledge, but through continuous questioning and discovery. The paradox invites us to think about how knowledge emerges and how our pursuit of understanding unfolds over time. Prisoner's Dilemma. The prisoner's dilemma is a classic example of game theory that highlights the complexities of cooperation and self-interest in decision-making. It is a situation in which two individuals, acting in their own self-interest, fail to cooperate in a way that would lead to the best possible outcome for both. The paradox lies in the fact that while cooperation between the two would yield a better result for each of them, the temptation to act in one's own interest can lead both parties to make decisions that result in a worse outcome overall. The prisoner's dilemma provides insights into human behavior, social dynamics, and even the challenges of global cooperation in areas like economics, politics, and environmental issues. The classic version of the prisoner's dilemma involves two suspects who are arrested and charged with a crime. The authorities have insufficient evidence to convict either of them of the main charge but have enough evidence to convict both on a lesser charge. The prisoners are separated and offered a deal by the prosecutor. Each prisoner has two options. They can either betray or defect on the other and testify against them, or they can remain silent and cooperate with their fellow prisoner. The outcomes of their decisions are structured as follows. If both prisoners remain silent, cooperate, they each get a reduced sentence, say 1 year in prison. If one prisoner defects, betrays, and the other remains silent, the one who defects goes free, while the one who stays silent gets a harsh sentence, say 10 years. If both defect, they both receive a moderately harsh sentence, say 5 years each. The dilemma arises because, from each prisoner's perspective, defecting seems like the best option. If they remain silent while the other defects, they will receive the maximum punishment, 10 years. However, if they defect and the other remains silent, they will go free. The paradox is that, while both prisoners would fare better if they cooperated by remaining silent, the fear of being betrayed leads each prisoner to defect, which results in a worse outcome for both. The central feature of the prisoner's dilemma is that while mutual cooperation would lead to the optimal outcome, both prisoners getting 1 year, the rational self-interested choice for each prisoner is to defect, resulting in both receiving 5 years. The dilemma illustrates how individual rationality can lead to a collectively irrational outcome. Each prisoner, acting in their own best interest, ends up worse off than they would be if they cooperated, even though they both understand that mutual cooperation would benefit them more. The prisoner's dilemma is not just a thought experiment confined to criminal justice but can be applied to a wide variety of real-world situations. One example is the arms race between two nations. If both nations agree to reduce their nuclear arsenals, they can both benefit from the reduction in tension and military expenditure. However, each nation faces the temptation to break the agreement and maintain or expand their nuclear capabilities, hoping the other will comply. If both countries defect and build up their arsenals, the result is a costly arms race, where both nations end up worse off than if they had cooperated and reduced their arsenals. The prisoner's dilemma also appears in economics, where businesses or individuals may face similar situations of cooperation versus self-interest. For example, two companies may agree not to lower their prices, which would benefit both by maintaining profit margins. However, if one company lowers its prices to attract customers, it can gain a competitive advantage, while the other is left with higher prices and fewer customers. If both companies lower their prices, they both end up with reduced profits. The result is a classic example of the dilemma, where individual self-interest leads to a suboptimal collective outcome. Beyond these examples, the prisoner's dilemma has deep philosophical and ethical implications. It raises questions about human nature, trust, and the role of cooperation in society. The dilemma shows how, even in situations where cooperation is beneficial, individuals may choose to act selfishly due to fear of being taken advantage of. This dynamic mirrors many social situations, where trust and mutual benefit are undermined by concerns over exploitation. The paradox also touches on the challenge of achieving collective action in larger-scale issues, such as climate change, resource management, and international relations. In these areas, the prisoner's dilemma illustrates how countries or organizations might be reluctant to cooperate on global challenges if they fear that others will not uphold their commitments. For example, countries might hesitate to reduce carbon emissions, hoping that others will take action first, leading to a situation where no one acts and the problem worsens. The prisoner's dilemma is thus not only a philosophical puzzle but a real-world obstacle to effective cooperation on a global scale. Interestingly, the prisoner's dilemma also has a solution: repeated play. In the context of repeated interactions between the same parties, the dynamics of the dilemma can change. In what's known as the iterated prisoner's dilemma, players can cooperate over time, learning to trust each other and forming strategies that lead to mutual cooperation. If both players know they will encounter each other again, they may choose to cooperate in the present, since future interactions are possible and betrayal might lead to retaliation in subsequent rounds. This introduces the concept of tit for tat, a strategy in which a player initially cooperates and then mimics the opponent's previous move. If the opponent cooperates, the player continues to cooperate, but if the opponent defects, the player retaliates by defecting in the next round. This strategy has been shown to be highly effective in promoting cooperation in repeated versions of the prisoner's dilemma. The iterated version of the dilemma illustrates the potential for trust and cooperation to emerge in situations where the one-shot game would result in pure defection. Over time, participants can learn that cooperation is in their best interest, and the fear of mutual destruction from defection decreases. This also mirrors real-world dynamics in relationships, business partnerships, and international agreements, where repeated interactions can lead to more stable cooperation, even in competitive environments. One key takeaway from the prisoner's dilemma is that cooperation can be fragile and easily undermined by short-term self-interest. However, in scenarios where cooperation is repeatedly necessary, long-term relationships and strategies can foster trust and mutual benefit. The dilemma challenges us to rethink our assumptions about human behavior, emphasizing that while self-interest often guides decision-making, cooperation can provide greater rewards if sustained over time. In conclusion, the prisoner's dilemma serves as a powerful tool for understanding cooperation, competition, and self-interest in decision-making. It highlights the tension between individual rationality and collective well-being, showing how short-term selfish behavior can lead to worse outcomes for everyone involved. The paradox is not just an abstract puzzle but a reflection of real-world social dynamics, whether in criminal justice, business, politics, or global cooperation. The key to overcoming the dilemma lies in understanding the benefits of trust and collaboration, and in recognizing that mutual cooperation often leads to better long-term outcomes for all parties involved. Sorites Paradox. What if the tiniest change could make a huge difference, but you couldn't tell exactly when it happened? This is the essence of the Sorites Paradox, also known as the paradox of the heap. At first glance, it seems like a logical riddle, But the implications of this paradox challenge our understanding of definitions, categories, and the nature of change itself. The paradox gets its name from the Greek word sorites, meaning heap, and it originates from the ancient philosopher Eubulides of Miletus. The basic problem can be summarized like this. If you take a heap of sand and remove just one grain at a time, at what point does it stop being a heap? Remove a single grain and you still have a heap. But if you keep removing grains, you'll eventually have no sand at all. So, where exactly does a heap stop being a heap? And how can we define the transition from one state to another? This paradox plays on our everyday experiences of gradual change. We all encounter situations where small, seemingly insignificant actions accumulate over time, but it's difficult to pinpoint the exact moment when something transitions from one state to another. Take a heap of sand, for instance. You could start with a large pile, and as you remove grains one by one, the pile will get smaller, but the change doesn't seem drastic. It's hard to say when the pile stops being a heap, because each individual grain seems too small to make a real difference. You might argue that even after removing a few grains, it still looks like a heap. But if you keep removing more and more grains, the pile eventually disappears entirely, leaving no sand at all. At what point did it cease being a heap? This paradox isn't just about sand, it extends to many areas of life. Imagine you have a pile of leaves in your yard. You start by picking a single leaf and it doesn't feel like much of a change. The pile is still there and it looks like a pile of leaves. But as you keep picking leaves one by one, you'll eventually be left with no leaves at all. At which moment did the pile of leaves cease to be a pile? The process is so gradual that it becomes nearly impossible to say exactly when the transition occurred. This highlights a fundamental problem with how we categorize things and define concepts. The Sorites Paradox reveals the difficulty in dealing with vague terms and concepts. Heap is a vague word because it doesn't have clear-cut boundaries. A heap can be big or small, and the transition from a heap to something that isn't a heap doesn't happen suddenly. Instead, it's a gradual process, and as we remove individual grains or leaves, it becomes more and more difficult to determine when the heap is no longer a heap. This problem exists with many other concepts in language and philosophy. For example, when does someone become old? If you look at a person's age, you can't pinpoint a specific age at which they cross from being young to being old. It's a gradual process, and the Sorites Paradox challenges us to think about how we define terms that involve a gradual transition. This paradox also calls into question how we understand the nature of change. We tend to think of change as something that happens in discrete steps. But the Sorites Paradox suggests that change can be so incremental that it's hard to notice. Each small change may not seem significant, but when you add them up over time, they can lead to a drastic transformation. In this way, the paradox forces us to reconsider how we perceive gradual change. It reminds us that sometimes, the most important changes are the ones that happen so slowly we don't even notice them until they're complete. In a sense, the Sorites Paradox reflects our broader struggle with ambiguity. It's not just about sand or leaves. It's about the challenges we face when trying to make sense of a world that doesn't always fit neatly into categories. We often have to deal with things that don't have clear definitions, things that are hard to categorize. A heap of sand isn't always a heap, just as a person isn't always young or old, and a situation isn't always dangerous or safe. The Sorites Paradox challenges our desire for precision, showing us that some things are inherently vague and don't have easily defined boundaries. So, what does this paradox tell us about the way we think? On one hand, it highlights the limitations of language and categorization. The terms we use, like heap, old, or tall, are often imprecise, and trying to define them with absolute clarity can lead us into philosophical confusion. On the other hand, the Sorites Paradox also forces us to embrace the idea of gradual change. It encourages us to recognize that even small, seemingly insignificant changes can accumulate and lead to something significant over time. Whether it's in our personal lives, in social or political movements, or in the natural world, the cumulative effect of small changes can often be more important than we realize. The Sorites Paradox also has important implications in areas like ethics and decision-making. In moral philosophy, for example, we often deal with concepts that involve gradual change. Take the example of lying. If you tell a single small lie, it might not seem like a big deal. But if you keep telling small lies over time, the cumulative effect can be much more damaging. In this sense, the Sorites Paradox suggests that small actions can add up to significant consequences, even if each individual action doesn't seem harmful on its own. This idea is also important in the context of social change. Small acts of resistance, small shifts in public opinion, or small changes in behavior can eventually lead to large-scale societal transformations. The Sorites Paradox reminds us that even the smallest actions can matter, and that change is often a gradual process rather than a sudden event. There's also an interesting way in which the Sorites Paradox connects to the concept of thresholds. In many aspects of life, we face situations where we need to decide whether something has reached a certain threshold. When does a glass of water become full? How many small changes does it take before we can say something has crossed a line? The Sorites Paradox challenges us to think about these thresholds and how arbitrary they can be. The process of determining when something stops being one thing and starts being another is often subjective and depends on the perspective we adopt. The challenge is not necessarily about finding a precise point of change but recognizing that the change is ongoing and gradual. In this way, the Sorites Paradox forces us to confront the complexity of the world. It highlights how our need for clarity can sometimes clash with the reality that many things are not easily defined. Whether it's sand, leaves, age, or morality, the Sorites Paradox shows us that life often exists in a gray area. It's not always possible to draw clear lines between one category and another, and sometimes the most significant changes happen so gradually that we fail to notice them until it's too late. The paradox teaches us to think critically about how we categorize and define things, and it reminds us that even the smallest changes can have far-reaching effects. Ultimately, the Sorites Paradox isn't just a puzzle for philosophers. It's a lens through which we can better understand the world around us. It challenges our thinking about definitions, categories, and the nature of change, and it encourages us to embrace the uncertainty and ambiguity that are inherent in life. Sometimes it's not about finding the exact point where a change occurs, but about recognizing that change is always happening, one small step at a time. The Unexpected Exam Paradox. The Unexpected Exam Paradox is a fascinating and somewhat counterintuitive problem in logic and philosophy that challenges our understanding of knowledge, prediction, and expectations. It's a paradox that presents a situation where a teacher informs a class that there will be an exam during the week, but with the twist that the exam will be unexpected. That is, the students will not be able to predict the day on which the exam will occur. The paradox arises from the attempt to reconcile this statement with the logical reasoning of the students, leading to an apparent contradiction. The paradox is a great example of how our intuitive understanding of time, knowledge, and expectation can sometimes be at odds with formal logic. Here's how the scenario typically goes. A teacher tells a class that there will be a surprise exam sometime during the week, which is understood to mean that the students cannot predict the day of the exam. The teacher's statement can be phrased like this: "You will have an exam sometime between Monday and Friday, but you will not know the day of the exam until it happens. It will be a surprise." The students, upon hearing this announcement, begin to reason about the situation logically. They think through the week and try to figure out when the exam could take place, assuming they know everything there is to know about the situation. On Friday, the students reason that the exam cannot be held on that day. After all, if the exam hasn't happened by Friday, then it would no longer be a surprise. So they conclude that the exam must take place on one of the earlier days, Monday through Thursday. Next, they consider Thursday. If the exam hasn't occurred by Thursday, then they reason that it must be on Friday. But since they've already ruled out Friday, they conclude that the exam cannot occur on Thursday either. They continue this line of reasoning for Wednesday, Tuesday, and Monday, concluding that the exam can't happen on any day of the week, based on the teacher's statement that it will be a surprise. This leads to a paradox. According to their reasoning, the exam cannot occur on any day of the week. However, at some point during the week, the teacher indeed gives the exam and the students are surprised. The exam therefore happens on a day they thought could not possibly be the day, making the event a surprise in a way that defies their logical expectations. The paradox here stems from the contradiction between the students' reasoning and the reality of the exam. Logically, they conclude that the exam is impossible because it cannot be both scheduled and a surprise at the same time. However, the teacher's statement that the exam will be a surprise turns out to be true, even though the students logically deduce it can't happen. This is a perfect example of how reasoning based on seemingly solid assumptions can lead to an unexpected and paradoxical outcome. The unexpected exam paradox is often framed as a paradox of knowledge and expectation. The student's reasoning is based on the assumption that they can fully predict the future of the week, but in doing so, they overlook the possibility that their knowledge about the situation is incomplete. Their belief that they can deduce when the exam will occur leads them into a trap, and this trap creates the contradiction between their expectations and the reality of the situation. One interesting aspect of this paradox is that it highlights the limitations of reasoning about future events when there is uncertainty about the specific timing. In other words, the students assume that knowing the teacher's statement about the exam will allow them to figure out the exact timing, but this assumption is flawed because the element of surprise is not just about the unknown timing. It's about the fact that the student's reasoning itself cannot account for all the variables at play. There is also a more philosophical interpretation of the paradox that focuses on the concept of knowledge. If the students can prove, using logical deduction, that the exam cannot happen on any day, they have effectively removed the possibility of surprise. But the moment the teacher actually gives the exam, the students are left in a state of surprise, because the event happens despite their logical expectations. This raises questions about what it means to know something, whether knowledge is simply about having all the facts, or whether it is about understanding that there are limits to our ability to predict and understand the future. A related interpretation of the paradox is that it illustrates a kind of cognitive trap where logical reasoning, rather than providing clarity, creates an illusion of certainty and prevents the students from seeing the true nature of the situation. The paradox exposes the tension between logical deduction and actual events in the real world. Just because something seems logically impossible doesn't mean it's impossible in practice. Some philosophers and logicians have discussed the unexpected exam paradox in relation to other well-known paradoxes, such as the liar paradox and the paradox of the unexpected hanging. These paradoxes share a common theme of seemingly self-contradictory reasoning, in which logical deductions lead to outcomes that defy expectations. In the case of the unexpected exam paradox, the self-contradiction arises because the students believe they can predict the future, but they cannot account for the surprise element, which makes the event unfold in a way they didn't foresee. While the students' reasoning in the paradox seems sound at first, the situation itself reveals the limits of that reasoning. The paradox challenges our assumptions about certainty and prediction. It forces us to question how we form expectations about the future and how our knowledge, or the illusion of knowledge, can prevent us from seeing possibilities that lie beyond our logical frameworks. In real-world applications, the unexpected exam paradox has implications for decision-making, especially in situations involving uncertainty and surprise. In many areas of life, we try to predict outcomes based on available information, but the paradox shows how our predictions can be flawed or limited by the very assumptions we make. It is a reminder that even with all the facts, we may still be surprised by the future because our reasoning and expectations are constrained by our knowledge. Moreover, the paradox can be connected to broader discussions of surprise and unpredictability in various domains. For instance, in economics, markets often behave in unpredictable ways, even when we have vast amounts of data and predictive models at our disposal. Similarly, in the realm of artificial intelligence, machines that make predictions based on algorithms can still produce surprising results when faced with new or unforeseen data. The unexpected exam paradox is a way of illustrating the broader principle that, no matter how much we think we know or how much we try to predict, the future is often full of surprises that defy our expectations. In conclusion, the unexpected exam paradox is a thought-provoking problem that challenges our understanding of knowledge, expectation, and logic. It demonstrates how our reasoning about the future, no matter how thorough, can still lead to unexpected results when we fail to account for all the variables involved. The paradox serves as a reminder that knowledge is often limited, and that the future, despite our best efforts, remains inherently unpredictable. By examining the paradox, we gain insight into the complex relationship between reasoning, expectation, and surprise, an important lesson both in philosophical discussions and in real-world decision-making. Sleeping Beauty Paradox. The Sleeping Beauty Paradox is a thought experiment in probability theory and philosophy, which presents a scenario that tests the limits of our understanding of probability, belief, and knowledge under uncertainty. It is centered around a seemingly simple situation, yet it creates a profound puzzle that challenges the way we think about probability and the impact of new information on decision-making. The paradox is often used in discussions about epistemology, particularly when considering the role of memory, self-location, and how we update our beliefs when faced with uncertainty. The problem begins with a setup in which Sleeping Beauty, the subject of the experiment, is involved in a seemingly straightforward game that is filled with hidden complexities. The situation goes as follows. Sleeping Beauty is put to sleep and then awakened as part of an experiment that involves a fair coin toss. If the coin lands heads, she will be awakened only once. If the coin lands tails, she will be awakened twice, once on Sunday and once on Monday. The key to the paradox is that Sleeping Beauty has no memory of her previous awakenings. She is unaware of whether she is in the first or second awakening because she is in a deep sleep and has been told that she will forget once she is asleep again. Upon each awakening, she is asked to assess the probability of the coin having landed heads. The paradox arises from the fact that the coin is equally likely to land heads or tails, but once Sleeping Beauty wakes up, the number of awakenings complicates her assessment of the odds. The central question in the paradox is, what is the probability that the coin landed heads when Sleeping Beauty is awakened? This seemingly simple question leads to two competing answers that have sparked much debate. One answer suggests the probability is 1/3, while the other suggests it is 1/2. To understand the paradox fully, it's crucial to break down the reasoning behind both positions. Those who argue that the probability is 1/3 adopt what is known as the thirder view. The thirder argument takes into account the fact that there are three possible awakenings, one in which the coin lands heads and two in which the coin lands tails. Since each outcome is equally likely, and there are two awakenings for tails, the probability of tails becomes 2/3, and the probability of heads becomes 1/3. Therefore, when Sleeping Beauty is awakened, she should assign a 1/3 chance to the coin having landed heads. This reasoning is grounded in the idea that the likelihood of heads should be proportional to the number of possible awakenings, and since two of the three awakenings correspond to tails, it makes sense to assign a higher probability to tails. The thirder view emphasizes the importance of taking into account the number of awakenings that are associated with tails. In contrast, those who argue that the probability is 1/2 adopt the halfer view, which is rooted in the idea that the coin flip is a fair, independent event. According to the halfer argument, when Sleeping Beauty is awakened, she should assign a half probability to heads and a half probability to tails. The reasoning behind this view is based on the fact that the coin flip itself is a random event with equal chances for heads or tails, and the number of awakenings does not affect the probability of the original coin flip. The halfer perspective argues that the experiment setup, whether Sleeping Beauty is awakened once or twice, does not alter the fairness of the coin toss. Since there are only two possible outcomes, heads or tails, and the coin is fair, the probability of each outcome should remain 1/2. This perspective places less emphasis on the fact that Sleeping Beauty is awakened multiple times and more on the idea that the coin flip is an independent event with equal probabilities for both heads and tails. The paradox lies in the tension between these two views. The thirder position claims that the probability is 1/3, while the halfer position argues that it is 1/2. Both views seem to have valid reasons, yet they lead to different conclusions. This apparent contradiction has generated extensive debate and discussion in probability theory, philosophy, and epistemology. One of the key elements of the Sleeping Beauty paradox is the concept of self-location, which refers to the idea of determining one's position within a given probability space. In this case, the challenge is understanding how Sleeping Beauty should update her beliefs about the outcome of the coin flip when she is unaware of which awakening she is in. When Sleeping Beauty is woken up, she cannot recall whether she was woken up on Sunday or Monday, and this lack of memory complicates her ability to evaluate the probabilities. Her lack of memory creates a situation where she has no way of knowing how many times she has been awakened, which means she cannot base her reasoning on the information she has acquired through previous experiences. This introduces an element of uncertainty that makes the problem especially tricky. The paradox also highlights the importance of updating beliefs in light of new information. In many cases, we are taught to update our beliefs when we receive new evidence, but the Sleeping Beauty paradox demonstrates how difficult it can be to update our beliefs when the new information, such as the number of awakenings, does not fit neatly into our existing mental framework. The paradox thus forces us to reconsider how we approach probabilities when we are confronted with uncertainty and incomplete knowledge. Additionally, the paradox raises questions about the role of symmetry in probability theory. In the Sleeping Beauty experiment, there are two possible outcomes, heads or tails, and the coin toss is fair. However, the symmetry of the problem is disrupted by the fact that Sleeping Beauty could be awakened once or twice. This disruption creates an asymmetry that makes it difficult to apply traditional probabilistic reasoning. While the halfer view maintains that the symmetry of the coin toss should govern the probabilities, the thirder view acknowledges the disruption caused by the additional awakenings for tails. This tension between symmetry and asymmetry is at the heart of the paradox. The Sleeping Beauty paradox is also an example of how probability theory interacts with human cognition and intuition. The way we naturally approach probability is often at odds with the more formal, mathematical approach that is used in the thirder argument. Our intuitions about fairness and randomness suggest that the probability of heads should be 1/2, as the coin is fair and there are two possible outcomes. However, the fact that Sleeping Beauty could be awakened twice complicates this intuition, and the thirder argument forces us to consider the impact of additional information, such as the number of awakenings, on our probability assessments. The paradox also invites us to think about how we define and interpret probabilities. In classical probability theory, probabilities are often defined as the long-run frequency of events, but in the Sleeping Beauty paradox, the question is not about the long-run frequency of heads or tails but about what Sleeping Beauty should believe in a specific instance of awakening. This focus on a single instance of awakening emphasizes the subjective nature of the problem, as the probability that Sleeping Beauty assigns to heads is based on her personal experience and understanding of the experiment. The paradox also serves as a springboard for broader philosophical discussions about the nature of belief and knowledge. It raises questions about how we form beliefs about uncertain events, especially when we have limited information. Sleeping Beauty's inability to recall her previous awakenings introduces an epistemic challenge. She has no memory of her past experiences, which complicates her ability to update her beliefs. This mirrors real-world situations in which people must make decisions based on partial or incomplete information. In such situations, our beliefs about the likelihood of certain events are influenced not only by the available evidence but also by the way we process and interpret that evidence. Another philosophical issue raised by the Sleeping Beauty paradox is the relationship between subjective and objective probabilities. The third view focuses on subjective probabilities, as Sleeping Beauty's subjective experience of being awakened twice for tails leads her to assign a higher probability to tails. The half view, on the other hand, emphasizes objective probability, which treats the coin flip as a fair, random event with equal chances for heads and tails. The paradox thus forces us to grapple with the distinction between subjective beliefs and objective facts and how these concepts interact in the context of probability. The Sleeping Beauty paradox has inspired a wide range of responses and interpretations, and there is no universally agreed-upon solution. Some have suggested that the paradox highlights the limitations of our intuitive understanding of probability, while others have argued that it reveals deeper insights into the nature of belief and knowledge. The paradox continues to be a subject of intense discussion in philosophy, epistemology, and decision theory, as it provides a rich context for exploring questions about uncertainty, self-location, and the impact of memory on belief formation. Ultimately, the Sleeping Beauty paradox challenges us to reconsider how we think about probability and how we update our beliefs when faced with uncertainty. It forces us to confront the complexities of decision-making under uncertainty and to question how we incorporate new information into our understanding of the world. As a result, it remains a powerful and thought-provoking puzzle that continues to shape discussions in probability theory and philosophy. Paradox of Thrift. What if saving money could actually harm the economy? At first, this might seem counterintuitive. After all, isn't saving money one of the most responsible things a person can do? Doesn't it make sense to be frugal, to live within your means, and to prepare for the future? These are principles many of us live by, but the paradox of thrift challenges this way of thinking in a surprising way. The paradox suggests that when everyone collectively tries to save more money at once, it can actually lead to negative outcomes for the economy and society as a whole. It sounds odd, doesn't it? Saving is supposed to be good, but what if saving too much is bad for all of us? This paradox finds its roots in Keynesian economics, a theory introduced by John Maynard Keynes. According to Keynes, while saving money is vital for individual financial health, if everyone saves too much during tough times, the result can be a significant reduction in economic activity, causing a downturn in the economy. It's hard to imagine how saving could actually make things worse, but it happens in a very specific way. Let's take a closer look at this idea. Imagine a family that's worried about the uncertain future and decides to cut back on their spending. They start saving more, avoiding unnecessary purchases like dining out, shopping for non-essentials, or canceling subscriptions. On the surface, this seems like a prudent and responsible decision, doesn't it? But now, what if every family in town made that same decision? What happens when everyone saves instead of spends? When all the families in town try to save more, businesses begin to feel the effects. Restaurants, stores, and entertainment venues start seeing fewer customers. Demand for goods and services drops, and businesses, in turn, may have to make difficult decisions. They might lay off workers, reduce employee hours, or even shut down entirely. Unemployment starts to rise, and now those workers who have lost their jobs or had their hours cut are left with less money to spend. They too start saving more, cutting back further on their expenses. This leads to a downward spiral. Fewer people spending means more layoffs and closures, which means even less spending. And so on until the entire economy starts to shrink. It's a cycle where saving, which is usually a good thing, ends up causing widespread harm to the economy. So, the very thing that seems beneficial, saving, is actually contributing to a decline in demand, which in turn hurts businesses and leads to a decrease in jobs. This is the paradox of thrift. What's good for an individual may not always be good for the society as a whole. When everyone tries to save more at the same time, the collective result is an economic contraction. This is why Keynesian economists argue that during periods of economic downturn, it's not the time to save, it's the time to spend. Governments, in particular, have a role to play in stimulating demand. Through policies like government spending, stimulus packages, or tax cuts, the government can offset the reduction in consumer spending and inject money back into the economy, helping to boost demand and reverse the downward spiral. Now, let's think about the role that consumer spending plays in the economy. In many developed economies, consumer spending makes up a large chunk of the country's GDP. When people spend money, businesses make money, and this money is then used to pay employees, invest in new products, and keep the economy running smoothly. But when people stop spending and decide to save more, businesses start feeling the squeeze. Demand for products and services falls, and businesses struggle to stay afloat. They might have to reduce their workforce, cut wages, or even go out of business. The ripple effects of these decisions can be felt across industries. The paradox here is that while saving is essential on a personal level, when everyone in an economy does the same thing at once, it can lead to economic stagnation and even recession. What's also fascinating about the paradox of thrift is its effect on investment. When people save more, they typically deposit their money into savings accounts or buy low-risk assets like bonds or government securities. While this is good for individual security, it reduces the amount of money available for businesses to borrow for expansion or new projects. This reduction in business investment can stunt economic growth and reduce the overall capacity for job creation. So, the paradox continues: more savings might seem like a good thing, but it's not always beneficial for the economy if businesses don't have enough capital to invest in growth. This leads us to a discussion about interest rates. When more people save money, there's more money available in the financial system. This surplus of savings could theoretically lower interest rates, which would make borrowing cheaper. On the surface, this might sound like it's good for the economy. After all, businesses can borrow money cheaply to invest in new ventures. But here's where it gets complicated. When interest rates are too low, businesses might be less likely to invest. Why? Because the returns on investment might not be enough to justify taking on debt, especially in uncertain economic times. So, even though there's more money in the system, businesses might hold back from borrowing and investing, which slows down economic growth. And this is where the liquidity trap becomes important. During economic recessions, consumers and businesses often become more cautious. People are afraid to spend or invest because they're uncertain about the future. This lack of spending is known as a liquidity trap, where even low interest rates can't stimulate demand. People are so focused on saving that they're not willing to spend, and businesses aren't willing to invest. As a result, the economy stalls. The paradox here is that the very actions individuals take to secure their own financial future, by saving more, end up causing the broader economy to suffer. The government can step in during such times, typically by increasing public spending, to help stimulate demand and break the cycle. Let's consider a real-world example: the global financial crisis of 2007 to 2008. During this period, many individuals and businesses became concerned about their financial stability, and as a result, they cut back on spending. People saved more and banks were less willing to lend money. As a result, consumer demand plummeted, and businesses faced a sharp decline in revenues. The economy contracted, and governments around the world had to step in with stimulus packages to prevent further damage. The paradox of thrift was clearly visible during this time. While individual saving was understandable, the collective result of increased savings was a slowdown in economic activity. But this paradox isn't just about saving during economic crises. It also highlights a deeper question about how much we should save in general. After all, saving is essential for individual financial security. We save for retirement, for emergencies, for major life events like buying a house or paying for education. But the paradox forces us to think about how our individual decisions, no matter how well-intentioned, affect the broader economic landscape. When everyone saves, there's less money circulating in the economy. The question becomes, how do we find the balance between saving for our personal future and ensuring the health of the economy as a whole? This is where investment comes into play. Instead of just saving, we can think about putting our money into things that promote growth. Whether it's investing in stocks, bonds, real estate, or starting a business, putting money into productive uses can help boost economic activity. When people invest, they create jobs, develop new technologies, and generate economic growth. This way, saving and investing become part of a broader strategy for economic health. It's not just about putting money away for the future, it's about using that money to make the economy work for everyone. One of the more surprising aspects of the paradox of thrift is its impact on government policy. When governments reduce spending in an effort to save money or pay down debt, it can have a similar effect to the actions of individuals. Government savings, in the form of budget cuts or austerity measures, can reduce the amount of money circulating in the economy. This can deepen recessions and prolong economic downturns, just as individual savings can. This is why many economists argue that during times of economic uncertainty, it is necessary for governments to increase spending, even if it means running deficits. Government spending can act as a counterbalance to the reduced spending of individuals and businesses, helping to stabilize the economy. In the end, the paradox of thrift challenges us to think more carefully about our financial choices. While saving is important for our personal security, we must also recognize the broader implications of our actions. If everyone saves at once, the economy can grind to a halt. The key to avoiding this paradox is finding a balance, saving enough to ensure our future security, but also spending and investing to keep the economy healthy. The paradox of thrift reminds us that personal financial decisions are often tied to larger societal outcomes, and we must carefully consider how our actions impact not just ourselves, but the world around us.